Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
The internet is full of half-truths and all-out lies. We've all seen them, and many people on social media complaining about it. Here's your chance to show and prove. WorldAfroPedia.com is a black-owned and operated encyclopedia. There are several thousand articles, but we need help. We can't uncover all the truth ourselves. So please, join us and become a writer, editor, or blogger for WorldAfroPedia.com today. Every little bit counts. We owe it to the future generations to put the truth out there. Visit WorldAfroPedia.com, the African-centered encyclopedia, a global database of African knowledge for the purpose of bringing about global African wisdom and understanding. WorldAfroPedia.com.
Summertime and the living is easy. Fish are jumping and the cotton is high.
Jazz legend Sarah Vaughan sang and scattered with the best of bebop's golden age. She made music with giants: Earl Hines, Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker, Count Basie. Audiences adored her. She scored big hits through the 50s, became a true symphonic diva in the twilight of her career, with sweeping numbers featuring lush orchestrations. She was an icon for women's and civil rights during the turbulent Jim Crow era. This hour on Point, the life and music of sassy Sarah Vaughan. Joining me now from Seattle, Washington, is Elaine Hayes, an author and jazz historian. She's out with a new biography called Queen of Bebop, The Musical Lives of Sarah Vaughan. You can read an excerpt on our website, onpointradio.org. Elaine Hayes, welcome to On Point.
Thank you for having me.
There has never perhaps been a more astonishing singer, writes one of our online posters, seemingly effortless musicality in every note. Looking forward to this program. Well, we're glad we can bring it to you. We should talk a little bit about race and the role it played both in the early days when Sarah Vaughan was touring with some of the great jazz combos of the time through a still segregated South, and also the role it played when promoting and marketing musicians later in her career in the 1950s and 60s. It sounded like touring through clubs in the South in the late 40s and early 50s was a pretty harrowing experience.
Yeah, black musicians were going, especially when they were accustomed being in the North, going down South. They were experiencing the full force of Jim Crow. And Sarah Vaughan, and when she was with the Billy Eckstine Band and the Earl Hines Band, encountered some really unfortunate, kind of scary situations. One that comes to mind is the Eckstine Band was playing an outside venue, and the Klu Klux Klan shows up, and they're in their robes, and they have shotguns that they're shooting into the air. And the band runs to their bus, and as they are driving out of town on Main Street, the Klu Klux Klan is actually lined up along Main Street and is shooting at the bus as they're leaving. And the only way the band kind of survives this is by getting down on the floor. But there were also other more subtle forms of racism. Sarah Vaughan would often say that, at least they're honest in the South. They don't like colored people and Jews. But in the North, that's just one of the worst places ever. And I feel like another story that kind of demonstrates that is a couple of years later in 1948, her career is it's on the rise. She's been crowned the Divine One by the DJ Dave Garroway, and she's gotten a gig at the Fairmont Hotel in Philadelphia. And her name is on the marquee, the Divine Sarah Vaughan, singing this week. And she walks into the hotel carrying her suitcase, goes up to the front desk and says, "Hi, I'm Sarah Vaughan." And they say, "Oh, great. We're so glad you're here. We're really looking forward to your performances this week. Here's the bellboy. He'll show you where you're going to sleep." So the bellboy takes her bag and proceeds to walk downstairs to the basement of the hotel, through the bowels of the hotel. They're passing the kitchen and the laundry room and then they make their way back to a locker room with an army cot in the middle. And the bellboy says, "Oh, that's for you." And she turns to him and looks at him and pauses and says, "Follow me." And she retraces her steps, walks back upstairs, out the front door of the Fairmont, across the street to the hotel across the street, and books herself into the penthouse, and confessed that basically she spent all the money she earned at the Fairmont in order to be able to stay at the penthouse, but she was determined that she was not going to be treated with disrespect.
There were attempts also to shoehorn her, you might even say, into singing various black styles, vernacular styles, or pigeonholing her in that way and saying, "You should sing this because you're a black American."
Yeah, this was especially the case early on in her career. There's a story where she talks about in 1946, she's just started out as a solo act. She's kind of struggling. And a very influential producer named John Hammond says, "Hey, I'll make you the next Bessie Smith." And she didn't want to be, a blues singer. And she says, no, I don't want to do that. And he was angry about it. But she later said that, lots of people think that because I'm black, I should sing the blues. And this made her angry. She understood that there were a lot of kind of connotations that came with the blues. It was often viewed as the music of the South, more rural, a more primitive, intuitive way of performing, and that this is how black people sounded. This is what they should sing. But early on and throughout her entire career, she wanted to create a different kind of music. She wanted to create a music that was her own, but also a music that was intellectual and very sophisticated and harmonically, rhythmically, just a different kind of music that didn't fit into those stereotypes. She wanted to create another way to hear what a black female voice could sound like.
And she didn't want to be Ma Rainey. She wanted to be Sarah Vaughan.
Yeah, she wanted to be herself. And that's one of the themes that runs throughout her entire career, that she's often has these external forces pressing up against her, be it a record producer, sometimes a husband or manager, or even a club owner saying, "We want you to do this." And she pushes back and she says, "No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be myself."
Our next stop this hour is Green, Maine, where Lou is standing by. Lou, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Ray. I'll let other people describe the magnificence of this woman's voice, which still thrills me. I'd just like to describe her persona on stage. I had the opportunity of seeing her in one of her final concerts, an outdoor concert in New Hampshire, and she filled the entire arena. But the most magical moment that I think is a good insight into her personality is when she first came out. She was wearing this huge tent of a gown with gigantic flowers on it, and the audience was so stunned because she looked absolutely magnificently beautiful. And she went to the microphone and she said, "Yes, now I look like Lena Horne, but by the end of this concert I'm going to look like Sarah Vaughan," because she perspired so profusely. But the evening was absolutely magical. I'll never forget it, and she still thrills me with her music.
Lou, thanks a lot for sharing that memory, and I'm glad you told that story because what Sarah Vaughan looks like comes up again and again in your story, Elaine Hayes, and why is that so critical?
Well, when she began her career, she was a very young woman, and like many young performers, she needed to work on kind of updating and glamorizing her look. And this was a pretty normal process. And especially as she was getting on bigger record labels, she needed to become a little bit more mainstream looking and kind of hip and glamorous. One of the reasons why Sarah Vaughan's looks are so central to the way we often tell our story is that in the early 1950s, her first husband basically created this elaborate marketing campaign called Sarah Vaughan and Her Pygmalion, where her husband was the Svengali who basically was in charge of creating this woman that we see today. He made her over from an ugly duckling into a beautiful swan. So this idea of, she used to be ugly and now she was pretty is, I think, in a large part a marketing campaign, but it does point to some issues where Sarah Vaughan maybe wasn't always as secure about how she looked. And the comments about I coming on stage and I look like Lena Horne and I come off looking like Sarah Vaughan. First of all, it makes me sad when I hear that, but it points to what some of the very high beauty standards there were for women performers during this age.
It is also, I think it speaks to the difficulties that black women trying to go mainstream may have faced when it came to their hair, when it came to whether you were dark-skinned or light-skinned. Mm-hmm. It's complicated for any woman singer. And just recently I was talking with Linda Ronstadt about this very thing, who I think, probably a lot of people think of as kind of a glamour puss, obviously beautiful woman, but how much emphasis there was from the label, from the promoters, from the people who made the record covers, the jackets for albums, to emphasize physical beauty. Its aesthetics may change over time, and I was trying not to look at these pictures, and the book, incidentally, has a great many wonderful pictures. I was trying not to be a 2017 man looking at this, but there's some early photos where she's quite young, and the line of her jaw and her head is thrown back where she's hitting a note, and it's a beautiful photo. And I thought at the same time there were probably a lot of Americans who just wouldn't think of this person as a beautiful person.
Yeah, so when I look at those pictures, too, I think she's adorable, but also she is a striking beauty. But we need to remember that then, perhaps more so than now, really the standard of beauty was kind of blonde, blue-eyed, thin woman. And as a black woman, it's, you just can't achieve that. So there really was a lot of emphasis on, like I said, streamlining this look and kind of telling a story that made it seem that she was more normalized, that, oh, yeah, she kind of fits into these mainstream standards of beauty.
But it's interesting that talent doesn't trump that necessarily. Our next stop, Valrico, Florida, where Bob is standing by. Bob, welcome to On Point.
Hi, Ray. How you doing? I just wanted to say you're talking to an 85-year-old white guy that was first introduced to Sarah Vaughan when I was in the military in Korea. Some disc jockey in his wisdom started playing her tunes, and we fell in love with her. We didn't care whether she was black, green, or yellow or whatever. She was an entertainer. She had a velvet voice. She knew how to sing. And I don't believe this story about she had such a hard time. Nobody looked at her as color. They looked at her as an entertainer, and she was a magician. And we all fell in love with her, and I love her to this day. I listen to her music, and they don't come any better. Thank you, Ray.
Little brother, I heard y'all ain't hitting in New York. Word. I heard y'all ain't hitting in L.A. Word, word. I heard y'all ain't hitting in North Carolina.
Eddie and Dorothy Wise are an African-American couple who wanted to live closer to the land. Eddie comes from 3 generations of farmers. So together he and his wife dreamed of raising hogs on their own plot of land in North Carolina. And in the early 90s, they took the first step to realizing that dream. What followed is what Eddie describes as more than 2 decades of systemic racism by North Carolina's branch of the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Farm Service Agency. Now, those are the people who are supposed to help farmers get loans and plan a profitable farm. At every turn, Eddie and Dorothy saw their farm loans delayed or denied, and it all culminated when they were evicted from their land in 2016. Reporter John Bewin captured the Wise's story for Reveal, a radio program and podcast for the Center for Investigative Reporting. Otherwise, John is a producer for the podcast Seen on Radio from Duke Center for Documentary Studies, and he joins us now. Welcome, John. Good to talk with us.
Good to be back, Frank.
It is good to have you here. John, Eddie Wise is on his way, and so hopefully we're going to have him here if all works out well. But let me ask you to maybe summarize this story, because Eddie and his wife was not a farmer. He decided to go back to the land. So tell us about that decision for him.
Right. So his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather were all sharecroppers, and he grew up working on helping them on the farms and so on. But he was determined to own a farm, not to work for somebody else, as he put it. And so he went and had a military career. He was a Green Beret in Vietnam and so on, and he taught in the ROTC programs at Howard University in Georgetown. Anyway, 30 years later, he is ready to buy a farm and finds a 100-acre farm in Nash County near Rocky Mount. And he and his wife, Dorothy, buy this place set out to buy it in 1991. It took them 5 years and relentless fighting through what they describe as relentless obstruction by the loan officer in Nash County.
Now talk about this, because it's kind of a two-step process. First thing you have to do is get a loan for the property, for the land, right?
Right. So every step. So go in and ask for an application for a loan. Well, we don't have any applications. Really? You don't have an application? Well, so Eddie goes and finds an application. Bring it in. Will you help me fill this out? Which they are supposed to do by law. No, I won't help you fill it out. I'm sure you can do it. Eddie finds somebody to help him fill it out. Well, here's what's wrong with your application. You don't have good credit. You don't have this, that, et cetera, just relentlessly pushing through this resistance until finally the loan was approved. Then they get an operating loan also. So they buy the land, they get an operating loan to get started. There's some repairs that are needed in the hog buildings on the farm. That loan is delayed. The operating loan is delayed, causing, after they've committed to buying hogs, so they get hogs in the buildings. The buildings aren't weatherized. Their entire herd freezes to death in the first winter, 1997-98.
And here's Eddie Wise now talking about that and the need to get that loan in a timely way, a loan that he would have expected under normal circumstances would have been approved. And so he was moving forward with this land because obviously the longer it takes you to get crops in the ground, or in this case those pigs, to market, you're paying interest on the first loan. You got to get things moving. He gets it moving, but they stall the loan. And here's what happens.
He drug the loan process out for 7 damn months.
Eddie had to call off the repairs, but he had already committed to picking up his hogs.
So by the time we got ready to bring them home in September, over half of them was already pregnant. And I had nothing but an open building with nothing but concrete floors. There were no curtains. And I had got some rolls of plastic and, tried to put up makeshift curtains to break the wind from blowing in there.
Winter nights in North Carolina often dip below freezing.
Newborn pig comes out at 90 degrees, and he hits a concrete floor, and you're talking about 4 or 5 minutes before he's dead. I had a little over 400 pigs to freeze to death.
That's Eddie Wise talking on a documentary radio program, the podcast Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting. And I'm speaking with the reporter, John Bewin, who produced that episode with farmer Eddie Wise, who is featured in the story. All right, let's take a step back, John, because historically racism has played, an important part in African-American farmers. And it goes way back. And finally, in the 1990s, this stuff was finally exposed. But it had been going on for a long time. Tell us about the history of this.
Right. So there was a major lawsuit filed by a North Carolina farmer named Timothy Pigford in the 90s that resulted in a major class action lawsuit that was settled. And it was found that there was systemic discrimination throughout. Now, it tended to be in the South, but that's because that's where the black farmers are and were. And that basically this kind of thing that Eddie faced was systemic from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. At least that's what was documented in the lawsuit.
And it had been going on really since after the Civil War. 40 acres and a mule And what had happened, of course, was that the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, administered this, but it allowed local counties to do the administration. And so they were the ones, they were the point of contact, and it was their culture and their ideas about who should and who should not get a loan that historically have driven these decisions. I mean, here's Eddie talking about the efforts that he had just in his encounters with these loan officers.
The good of Bonnet had an unwritten system. If you walked in the FHA and you were black, the first thing they did was close the books. And they said no to anything that you asked from that point on. They said it didn't have applications. If you got the application, they wouldn't tell you how to fill it out. And then when you finally got it filled out and turned it into them, then they hit you, oops, we're out of money.
That's an excerpt from the episode of the radio program and podcast Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting, and I'm speaking, that was Eddie Wise, and I'm talking with John Bewin, who is the reporter on this. So how much of this, again, was, and he runs into and finally finds a supporter and someone who can help him, someone in the person of Carl Bond. Tell us about Carl.
Carl Bond worked for 32 years for the Farm Service Agency in North Carolina. That's the what it's called, the branch of the USDA that does this business of providing loans for farmers. And Carl was, for many years, the only African-American loan officer in the state. And Eddie found him when he was having trouble dealing with a white loan officer. This is back in the 90s. And Carl helped him get through that process of getting his application filled out, eventually getting a loan. And then later, because the problems persisted, the state director, who was a Clinton appointee, just took Eddie's, the Wise's loan away from the white loan officer and had Carl service it and work with him, and worked with him for about a dozen years to keep him, to service the loan, ease the terms and so on, and keep them on the farm.
Well, and again, I want to take a step back and talk about why this hadn't been. I mean, again, this lawsuit is won in the 1990s. It had been going on for decades and decades. Why weren't things cleaned up once you have the lawsuit and you have demonstrated that racism is at the heart of all of this? Why didn't things get cleaned up then?
Well, I mean, basically, as far as we can tell, nobody was fired. There was no real clean effort to clean house in the USDA. The messages, and we have heard from people that under the Clinton administration and then under Obama, that the message from Washington on high was, we treat everybody the same, and that there were some concrete efforts made to try to train folks and so on in the county offices so that they would, and to put in some checks and balances and so on. But as Tom Vilsack, who was the Secretary of Agriculture under Obama, as he told me, and an African-American manager in the North Carolina system for many years said the same thing, and that is when you have a decentralized system like that, you have human beings, and of course there's still discrimination.
Right, because the local culture is what prevails. Here's Carl Bond, who was helping Eddie Wise out, the African-American officer who worked with Eddie, just talking about some of the irregularities that he spotted and trying to help Eddie through the process.
He came to my office. He said, would you assist me with this application? I said, well, yes. I said, but didn't you ask the loan officer that you got it from? He said, yes. We asked him. He said, you are a retired officer from the United States Army. Y'all should be able to do it.
Is that a normal thing for a loan officer to say, to decline to help a farmer looking for a loan?
No, it was required, and still is required, that if a farmer needs assistance, to help them fill out the forms.
That's Carl Bond, a former farm loan officer with USDA's Farm Service Agency. An excerpt from the radio program and podcast Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting. I'm talking with reporter John Bewin about this story. There were other irregularities, including doctored documents that you discovered along the way.
Well, yes, and what appears to be, yes, there's and that comes forward now, long after the Pigford black farmer settlement. We're talking the 20-teens here, and what led to the Wises' foreclosure and eviction from their farm was that their loan, ultimately their application for continued loan servicing was declined. And there's a document that we found in their file in which Carl Bond, helping them with the farm plan, had written out the numbers. Here's how many how many sows they have. They're going to produce this many piglets per litter. It's going to result in this number of cows. Pigs. They're going to be slaughtered and bring in this amount of money. And someone went in and changed the number, apparently. Carl had written 10 piglets per litter. Somebody wrote under that 8. And that seemed to be an explanation for how their application was initially approved by the computer and then denied.
And they found this through a lot of persistence. I mean, Eddie is working hard. He's trying to run a farm as well, and he's having to put. So let's put some names to this. The loan officer who refused to help Eddie in the first place, and then said his name is Sidney Long.
Yes,
is he still around?
He's still around. I spoke with him briefly on the phone. That's probably about a year ago, and he simply said, "I'm not going to talk to you about that."
Now, what about Paula Nichols? What's her role in
She
this?
is currently the farm loan chief for the FSA in the state of North Carolina. She was the loan officer who took over after Carl Bond retired in 2011, and he'd been working with the Wises for a dozen years. He retired, and she was the new loan officer who took over for him. It was in working with Paula Nichols then that things went south again, and the loan application was denied, and they were ultimately foreclosed
as a result of the doctor documents. Well, what about that? Is there any action that Eddie can take based on that?
They have a lawsuit pending in the Court of Federal Claims, and but I'm not sure that it even addresses directly those kinds of things. I'm not clear on that, honestly.
Meanwhile, last year it all came to ruin. Eddie ultimately was evicted, right?
Yes.
Let's listen, because you were there when the eviction was taking place. The marshals walk onto Eddie's land. They give him the bad news, and you were there when it was happening. Let's listen.
And here they come around that curve. White SUVs and squad cars, 7 vehicles in all. Officers spill out. I count 14 men and women, mostly U.S. Marshals with a few county deputies as backup. Some of the marshals carry semi-automatic rifles.
Come on down.
Why are you doing this morning, sir?
My dogs don't bite.
Sir?
I said, my dogs don't bite.
The U.S. Marshal, the leader of the operation, approaches Eddie and presents the papers.
Deputy Coney with the Marshal Service. You obviously know what's going on. Okay. The judgment,
I know you all. Come.
Yes, sir. There's a foreclosure judgment that's been issued against you and a seizure order. So we're going to have to remove you from your residence this morning, and there are certain items that are going to be taken. Okay.
My wife is sick.
Okay. Well, you're going to have to. We'll work with you and give you a reasonable amount of time, but you are going to have to get your wife and vacate the premises this morning, sir. Okay. And there's items we're going to be seizing on your property. There's a full list in here, and this copy is for you.
That's an excerpt from an episode of the radio program and podcast Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting. I'm talking with reporter John Bewin. That was Eddie Wise, who is featured in that report, who lost his farm after systematically being denied or having his loans delayed for his farm in North Carolina. So what did he lose?
They had a 106-acre farm, and it had he raised some. There was some fields and a big garden, but it was primarily about the hog buildings and so on, and their mobile home, and weirdly, 3 dogs that Eddie had had since they were puppies that were pets, and the marshals took those too.
They talked about his wife being sick. Talk about Eddie's wife.
Yes, she had diabetes already at this time and was kind of needed a wheelchair to move, and so that when they were evicted from the farm, they needed to sort of assist her. Her health has since gotten worse. She had both of her legs amputated. I think it was last fall. And she's in a nursing home now in Rocky Mount.
How much of this, the eviction, the loss of his farm, is due to the fact that these loans were delayed?
Well, the initial hole that they got in from the story we heard earlier about
we lost all the pigs,
losing virtually the whole herd in the very first year of operation, was a hole they never really dug out of, and they were trying to kind of scrape back. And he had no more additional loans with which to buy a new herd of hogs. So he's basically trying to breed, trying to, find friends who would sell him a few hogs cheap, that kind of thing. And gradually had a herd. He had 250 hogs. I had, that's how I met them, was 2008 and 2009. I did a 5-hour radio series called 5 Farms, in which they were one of the farmers I documented. They had 250 hogs then. And they were making some money, but that's a pretty tiny hog operation. And
they've got a lot of debt. I mean, there are still loans that
exactly.
They're
trying to have to pay their debt.
Right.
And they had off-farm income. Fortunately, he has an Army pension. Dorothy had a pension from her career at Howard University. They had Social Security checks. If not for that, so they were sort of gentlemen farmers in a way, supporting their farming habit. But they gradually were getting to where they were making some money, and they made some payments on the loans, although just basically interest or even parts of the interest. So their loan actually got bigger over the years. Carl Bond was keeping them going. But when he retired, basically folks seemed to decide that, well, enough of that. Party's over.
A farm in particular used to put people in oil drums, and after they've been dumped in oil drums, beat them up with a sambok, which are plastic.
A whip, basically.
A whip, basically.
Nico Jansen, farm manager.
The oldest house on the farm dates from before 1690. In the 1680s census, there were already 2 settlers here, 2 European hunters, hunting in our river for hippopotami and elephants, of which, of course, there are none left.
Mark Soames, farm owner.
I told him I don't trust white people at all.
So, in this room, what you have to remember is that this house was built by slaves. This is the ship that brought my ancestors here.
Mark is a 6th-generation South African who began investing in this farm 17 years ago.
There was this ship, the Arab, which I knew my ancestors had come on the Arab. I thought the Arab it's sunk in Table Bay.
Nico comes from a long line of farm and domestic labourers in the Cape Winelands.
People have to work from sunrise till sunset. And if you are a wife and a woman, how would you feel if your family could only start eating 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock in the evening because you have to still prepare food for them?
So it's underneath the city of Cape Town is the ship that brought my ancestors here. This valley, which is now called French Hoek, French Quarter, was called Olifantshoek, Elephant's Quarter. It's so sad. I mean, everything about South Africa is just excruciatingly painful, in layers upon layers.
Everybody I meet on this farm calls Mark Prof, or the Professor. Nico sowed nursery plants on the farm before Mark took it over.
Our first winemaker was German, but he was a boer, like in the Afrikaans sense, a boer. So one of the things he said to Professor was, listen, I don't like the idea that Nico's people doesn't work even on weekends and stop working so early. And then when Professor talked to me about it, I said to him, listen, that's exactly what I want to stop. I want to stop the slavery system.
It's an historic farm. It was established as a farm in 1690. So it dates the occupation by colonists. It was one of those places where the trouble began. The taking of the land is actually the essence of what colonization is about. And remarkably, all these years later and all these years after the end of apartheid, the land is still pretty much in the same hands.
I'm Audrey Brown reporting for the BBC World Service, and it is beautiful here on this farm with its tragic layers. Nico takes me for a stroll on a late summer afternoon after the harvest. Okay, what happens is are there things, snakes?
Yeah, there are snakes, and 2 familiar snakes, which are most of the most serious snakes. We got the Cape Cobra and the puff adder in our region.
Yes.
Seriously, on the farm.
Have
you
found them on this farm already?
Lots.
People been bitten?
Hundreds. No. Our people are very clever.
Okay, we'll check it out.
Avoid being bitten. But it could happen any time.
Okay, well, I better be one of your clever people and not get bitten. Okay. All right, let's stand here.
Yeah.
I said, now, I must just explain to
BBC World Service listeners, I'm standing in the middle of a vineyard, surrounded by mountains, the mountains that... Picturesque mountains. One of them is called the Lady on Her Back, the other one is called Devil's Tooth, and the other one is called Breasts. And if you saw them, you'll see exactly what people mean when they call them those, because it's so obvious. There's laughter here, but bitter inequality.
The essence of the problem, obviously, is the ownership of the land. How can you infuse your serfs in the project to transform your farm? The problem is I own the land. I own the land because my forebears stole it. And the farm workers who live there, who are my responsibility, my patriarchal responsibility, are there because their land was stolen from them, or because they were yanked there from foreign parts as slaves, and they were just deposited there by history. So on my land, I own it because of that history. They own nothing because of that history. How are you going to fix it? Well, you've got to give the land back.
So far, so obvious. Just give back the land. But can Mark bring himself to do it? After all,
I said to myself things like, well, it wasn't me who took the land. Who do I give it to? Some symbolic bushman? Or do we divide it up so that each family gets a little piece? And then I told myself, what about food security if we do that, forgetting, of course, that it's a wine farm? What I was doing was making excuses, not least of them, and the most practical of them, was, well, their farm workers don't know how to run a farm. If I was to give the farm to them, it would end in tears, But those are excuses. I really mean it when I say that morally there's no question about it, but that the land should be given back. And I finally came to the realization, and I'm not proud to say this to you at all, but it is the truth. I came to the realization I don't want to. For reasons of my own self-interest, despite knowing the history, despite facing all of those historical facts, there were 3 crimes against humanity, the stealing of the land, slavery and apartheid, all committed on my farm. And knowing all of that, I wasn't able to do the right thing. If morals were the only consideration, that is the right thing to do. If you have stolen goods, you can't keep them. And if you really want to rectify what's wrong in South Africa still today, and let me make it plain, what's wrong still today is that the perpetrators of apartheid have kept the spoils.
No, he can't do it. But he does decide to be a good farmer, better than so many who've come before him.
For 1994.
So what was it like to live and work on a farm before 1994?
Then the farmers were very bossy and controlling. You just had to do what you were told. If you made one wrong move, they chased you away quickly. And then you had to find other work. They're not as rude and high-handed as they used to be. When we first came here, farmers on all these farms used to force people to do work in the rain. They gave you a skimpy raincoat to work in, and you'd work all day, cleaning drains and furrows.
C.O.W.S, a retired worker on the farm. Was it like that everywhere?
All the farms around here used to be like that. But now it's not like that anymore. They used to make you work in the rain. You couldn't stop and go home when it started raining. Prof changed a lot of things. He did a lot about our housing. He did things that the other farmers didn't do. He put in DSTV.
Now you might think that cable TV is no big deal. But it's the way an entire generation of farm workers' children on this farm learned to speak English. Yet still Mark, the good farmer, and his workers remain worlds apart. No escaping the past.
And incidentally, I don't know if you've noticed, no white South African seems to have supported apartheid.
Yeah, it is a very famous joke in South Africa that there's no white person seems to have. Did you vote for apartheid?
No, as it happens, I didn't. But I know it carries no special meaning because everyone says that.
But you knew people who did?
Yes, and I think, to be honest, my own mother did. I remember her crying when Verwoerd was assassinated. We were not a particularly progressive family.
But he continues to try and make progressive changes.
I met with them and wanted to make plans with them as to how we can transform this farm, and it was quite impossible to have any kind of conversation with them.
I gave him just a piece of my mind. I said, who the hell do you think, Mark Soms, you're coming from abroad?
There was no precedent that you discuss with the landowner what's going to happen. I'm sure they didn't trust me. All sorts of things were factored into the impossibility of us planning together.
I'm indigenous to this farm and I'm indigenous to this land. And who do you think you people coming and you just buy up farms and kick people off? I'm sick and tired of it.
So I started making a few reforms on my own bat, as I had to, changing employment conditions and housing conditions and so on. And when the workers started to see that I really meant it, that I'm not like my predecessors, to my absolute horror, the conclusion they seemed to have come to was I'm a fool.
And he asked me if I wanted to come back and work for him. And I said, no, are you crazy? I'm not going to work for any white man anymore.
And so within a few months, we were in the most terrible situation where people were not turning up for work, taking advantage, as I experienced it, of my goodness, and feeling, these people are not grateful. And so in a few months, I'd become my own worst nightmare. I was speaking like a white South African farmer, and I was at loggerheads with my workers.
Things didn't look that well for the business. One of the ladies of the staff, of the kitchen staff, came to me and asked me, Nico, are you sure we're going to make it?
Somewhere along the line in this mess of difficult relationships and alienation, everything had to stop. Something new had to be done. Mark had to bring another part of himself to bear on this schism, the part of him that is a trained and practicing psychoanalyst. The farm stopped work.
If there's any one reason that I had to identify as to why I am more willing to face the unwelcome truth about what it means to be a white South African of my generation, it's probably that I was psychoanalyzed and learned how to look things in the eye. And, these are things which are self-evidently true, that we benefited. And
there must be another reason. I know psychoanalysts in South Africa, and they're still slightly recalcitrant. They do acknowledge, yes, it happened. And even the way they talk about it, it happened, not it was done. I read somewhere that on your farm is an ancient site, archaeological site.
What I did after realizing what a mess we were really in was to do what one does clinically, which is take a history. When a patient presents with a complaint, with a symptom, your first port of call in terms of trying to understand what needs doing is to take a history so you understand how it all began. That's how you arrive at a diagnosis. So I thought, let's do this. Let's take a history of my farm. And so I brought in professional help in the form of archaeologists and historians, and we stopped farming. The farm workers and I collectively assisted the archaeologists in digging up the history of the farm in order to understand how did we come to this pass. And one of the most momentous things that happened in that process was the discovery of a Bushman settlement site, 6,000 years old, about 50 yards from my front door. So that sort of puts things into perspective to see the physical evidence. And when I say physical evidence, I don't mean the odd shard or something. I mean, there were just thousands upon thousands of stone, beautiful microlithic stone tools and pottery shards and whatnot in this one spot. What more evidence do you need than that to demonstrate that this land was somebody else's? And it was made all the more dramatic, the finding of that settlement site, by dint of the fact that among the farm workers are the descendants of those dispossessed Bushmen and Khoikhoi, whose land this was. So it was an enormous eye-opener for us all.
Those excavations pulled everyone together.
British writer Zadie Smith was only 24 when her first novel, White Teeth, was published to huge acclaim in 2000. She's since written more books, won various awards and been celebrated as one of Britain's best authors. Her chosen setting has frequently been northwest London, where she grew up, and to which she returned for her most recent book, Swing Time. It's also the location of Grenfell Tower, where the recent fire heightened debate about social divisions and inequality in Britain. The main characters in the new book are two young women who grow up on neighbouring council estates and take very different paths in life. The BBC's Michelle Hussain has been talking to Zadie Smith.
To me, I suppose it was a little bit about the idea of talent supposedly in a meritocracy. I guess the idea of talent is that it lifts you out of your circumstance one way or another. But I was interested in who is defined as talented and whose talent is ignored and for what reasons. So it's a story about that too, about people who get away, supposedly at what cost, and people who stay and at what cost to them.
But do you have doubts about the idea that talent is the route to success? Are you saying something in the book about life being more chancy than that?
No, I suppose I have doubts about the supposed weight of talent. Like in a school like mine, for example, you'd have maybe one or two people who went to Oxbridge. This was meant to be the great aim. I suppose I was that person, one out of two in a school of 2,000. But then when I got to university and realised that from other schools, maybe 2/3 of that school went to Oxford or Cambridge, then you question what this talent really is. Is the argument that everybody in my school was mediocre? No, I don't believe it. Or everyone in these private schools were extraordinarily talented? No, that's not true either. So it's not. The meritocracy is not as pure as it seems, and I kind of always chafed at the idea of large portions of a school or a society being written off.
And you've become known over the years because of the things you've written as a chronicler of London, if you like, or at least of a slice of London, like
tiny
part
corner
of London,
like 10 streets. Yeah.
But it's a corner of London, very close to North Kensington, where the Grenfell Tower stood.
Right.
You knew that building.
Well, everyone in the neighbourhood knew that building. I was in New York when it happened. I do consider it a kind of crime. The thing which really struck me, actually, when I was thinking about it, is knowing those streets and the bit of Notting Hill and Ladbroke Grove that they back onto. I know, and I'm sure many other people in the neighbourhood have seen, these private security cars that drive up and down the fancy streets, 2 minutes from Grenfell, all day long and all night long, presumably to protect those multi-million-pound houses from people like the people who lived in Grenfell. So that's what struck me, actually, that there was this extraordinary private security system around the rich, and then the poor, who we were supposed to be protected from, were left in this completely without protection.
You wrote in the aftermath of the EU referendum last year, you suggested there was something about the picture that was being painted of Remain voting London, outward-looking, multicultural, that didn't quite ring true to you.
I mean, I wrote about it. It does seem to me, again, that people in London tend to make their own private arrangements, and they're interested in a kind of mixed society at a superficial level, but they're not actually that interested in being in really mixed neighbourhoods, in mixed communities, which actually is their own loss, in my opinion. I grew up in a mixed community, and it's incredibly beneficial for everybody. Mixed schools, mixed state schools, in which people from different walks of life are able to live together, be educated together, understand each other, is obviously a useful first step, but it's up to people to choose those schools, and you're not choosing them.
Do you think you're right about the neighbourhood, the northwest London neighbourhood, if you can call it that, again?
It sounds ridiculous, but I literally am thinking of a novel set in the neighbourhood in 1830, so there you go. It clearly is a preoccupation. It's very interesting, that time in London, and a time in my neighbourhood when it was pastoral, There was nothing prettier in London than Kilburn High Road, Willesden, Kensal Rise. This was really gorgeous country, right up until, the 1890s when the suburbs went up all in one go. So it's fun thinking about that time.
Zadie Smith talking to Michelle Hussain.
Seattle's a great place to visit because it has, I guess you could say, a little bit of everything, but I like to think of it as a lot of everything.
We want to spend the last part of the show today with another installment of our series, Uncomfortable Truths Confronting Race in America. We've been running this series for several months now and asking you to nominate yourselves to take part in some difficult but honest discussions about race. Rochelle Shimke heard that call out on the air, and she wrote to us. Rochelle grew up in the 60s on a farm in a very small white community in Tacoma, Washington. Her parents are white, like Rochelle, but she has two adopted brothers, Norton, who was adopted from South Korea, and her brother Garrett, who is black. Rochelle wrote to us, I would love to have a conversation with my brother about how we both grew up in the same land, but maybe saw completely different landscapes. So we invited Rochelle and Garrett to sit down and talk about their upbringing and how it's informed the way they perceive race in America today.
I have to confess that I did not see our family as different until just recently. I guess I have never thought of my brothers as a different color.
Yeah, same here. I mean, within what I would always exaggerate and say, within a 100-mile radius, Norton and I were it for everybody. There wasn't Latin or Asian or anything else. It was just us and everyone else. However, that was for me, I can only speak for myself, not Norton, my norm. So even though I could look and see that I was with a family of blonde-haired, blue-eyed, 8-foot-tall people, that was my normal. So I didn't grow up seeing that as meaning that I was different from them. It wasn't until I was old enough for people to see and say, hey, how come you don't look like your parents? From which then I took a leaf out of my dad's book and would make up an embellished story and say, well, back in the day, you know, the slave trade, it's a recessive gene, and I just kind of popped out. I mean, I would say things like that because I'm politically very incorrect. Yeah, I told my friends that. I said, it just came out. And Dad was behind me once when I told somebody that, and he gave me a little high five because it's like, way to go, son.
Dude, I never heard that. Yeah. So when do you think, Garrett, that you realized that you and Norton and all of us were all different colors?
Well, it's kind of like I knew, but that didn't register as being anything but normal. It wasn't till I didn't see that it was not normal until probably junior high when now we're out of the rural area. We're into school with more observers, so to speak, that can comment and notice that we're so different.
At Keithley Junior High.
Yeah. And that's what I think is so incredible is by all statistics, I should have had a really tough time in a rural farming community as the only black child for miles in the 60s. But I didn't feel that. And even to people then, if I were to ever say I am a black child, which isn't bad, but is kind of a comment of separation, like I am black, meaning I'm different than you, that would have probably struck them as a little strange. Like, well, I didn't know that because people just saw me as part of the community.
Right.
And there were occasions when we went into really small restaurants in the rural towns, and I could tell everyone sort of turned their heads and looked, and I thought, well, maybe it's because of me, but the thing about that is I never let that own my definition.
Okay.
I knew why they were possibly staring, but I didn't go into places thinking they're going to stare, they're going to hate, they're going to treat me differently.
Oh, God.
I recognized when it happened. I never really had any confrontations growing up, racially speaking. Really, the only confrontations I ever had with anyone was always people who looked like me, because I was different from them, possibly the way that I talked or the fact that I played banjo and like bluegrass music and were doing things that stereotypically weren't black enough.
Wow.
But from white people growing up in this rural farm town where I should have probably most likely have had that experience, I didn't have that.
So moving forward, like by 20, 30 years, so you and I got to hang out when you became a cosmetologist and you had your salon in Bellevue. I was shocked to hear during one of our chats about what you just mentioned, that you felt racism from black people to you, and not in King County from white people to you.
Yeah, that's the part that I want to tread lightly on. It is uncomfortable.
Oh, okay.
But that's the type of racism that I've always received, is that I don't come across black enough, whatever that is.
Wow.
That, and then the other one saying you're the whitest black man that I've ever met. I get that all the time.
Dang.
And it's a shame that if you speak like I do, whatever that is, if you listen to music that is outside of the urban or rap or what have you, that somehow that means you're not something, rather than you're taking the opportunity to think, I'm an American, so all these music types, all these cultures, all these things belong to all of us. So why not open your box more, grab as much as you can, rather than live in this small box that says you can only do these certain things, or otherwise you're not representing your people well enough. And that's in all cultures, I think, to some degree.
You have white women that used to come to your salon. And I think I asked you once why you never had women of color or black women in your salon. Do you remember that conversation? Do you remember that question?
Oh, no.
So, in your response to me was?
Okay. So, for one, I did grow up in a white family, partially Korean. My hair was straight growing up, so I only had experience with that. And black hair is something culturally that typically you have your black salons because there's a lot more to the whole process, which I don't know myself because I went to a beauty school, which some would call a white beauty school, where you have 30 seconds with a mannequin with afro black hair and someone's picking it out going, all right, you just got to pick it out a little bit. And then there's more education that needs to be known about doing black hair. So people would see me cutting hair in the salon and assume, oh, he's an expert, I'm going to ask for him. Because the question a lot of black women will ask when they go to a salon that they don't know or haven't gone to is, do they know how to do black hair? That is a very common question because you do need to know. It's different than everyone else's. And I wasn't taught that. I didn't grow up with it. Then the look of disappointment and disgust at me is, how could you be a black man and not know how to do your own people's hair? And that's very hard to have that conversation and to have to admit that. But on the other side, why do you assume that the white woman next to me doesn't know how to do your hair? She happens to be the expert in this whole salon. She puts in a lot of time. She went to a school that taught her. You're assuming she doesn't, and you're assuming I do. That's a double racist assumption in that part. But no one ever calls that out.
We just heard how Garrett never really considered himself to be a minority. He felt like he was part of the family and the larger community. But when he left that community and went just a few miles south to Sedro-Woolley, all of a sudden he wasn't one of the Shimkey kids. He was black.
So Sedro-Woolley is a little small town, as both of us know, kind of rural, just like more or less where we grew up on 32nd Avenue. And people have always been really friendly, maybe because it's also a farming town or a rural town. That is not the experience that you have. And when you shared your story, I was sick to my stomach. So can you please share again what happened with you going through Sedro-Woolley?
So Tiff and I used to live in Bellingham.
Right, okay.
And in the month of August, I would ride my bike from Bellingham to Seattle or Bellingham to Bellevue or reverse just to give myself a little challenge on a bike.
Okay.
And every time, strangely enough, and I don't go into places looking for this or expecting this, so that's why this is so different from anything else I've ever encountered in my life. The minute I crossed into the border of Sedro-Woolley on either side, either going to the south end or coming from the south end to the north, there was a truckload of white kids that just found me and would drive by, pass me, and then yell out the window the N-word, and then just keep going. God. So it happened 3 times, and so finally I came with another route that went around Chuckanut Drive the long way around because they didn't want to go through Sedro-Woolley. It was a little odd. It was almost like they were waiting there for somebody different to come through and do it. Now, I don't know if that represents, and I doubt it does, all of Sedro-Woolley. It just happened to be along Highway 9 that coming in and out, these groups of kids saw me and chased me down in a truck.
Damn.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah, but I honestly don't care because as long as it doesn't hurt me and they go on their way, it is just them screaming out a window. It's unsettling. But in the end, if that's all they have in them and that's all they're going to do, I don't need to change them as long as I get from point A to B unharmed.
It's horrifying for me that my beautiful brother, who I love with my life and with my heart, has been treated in horrible, racist fashions that I had no idea was going on.
But see, if you think of it this way, I mean, and I appreciate that, but considering how great of a life I had, if I had to do it all over again, I would choose the exact same path. Growing up in Tacoma, Puyallup, in a rural town with a community from which we lived, it was fantastic because most of all, it allowed me to be my own person. Mm-hmm. Sure, there might have been a few instances where that kind of thing happened, but really not until I was an adult. Mm-hmm. So I had a pretty safeguarded experience. Sure, people may have stared at me sometimes who had never seen a brown boy walking around, but that doesn't break me. Mm-hmm. And we all have struggles of our own, correct?
Oh, God.
But it's the greater of it all, and that is I grew up an individual, a supported individual in a beautiful community. I don't care about any of that other stuff. I'm not suffering. Mm-hmm. Sure, a truckload scared me, and they yelled out the N-word, but it doesn't devalue who I am in my own mind. As long as I'm not destroyed or hurt, it really isn't a, wow, he really struggled. Here's a little funny story.
Okay.
And, of course, with the way that I think, only this would happen to me with my naivety. Did you ever realize that I inadvertently dressed up as a Klan member for Halloween?
No!
Do you remember when I used to dress up as a ghost? I always wanted to be a ghost, but I always wanted the top to be pointy. And not until I was an adult did I realize, oh, my gosh, I was a Klan member. A black Klan member. Just get a sheet and cut 2 holes and off you go. Yeah.
That is
I just discovered that years ago. And
really?
Thought, oh, wow. I had no idea what I was doing. It was innocent.
Innocent.
Yeah.
Our whole life was so innocent.
It was.
It was
You're just
awesome.
not aware.
No,
and
I'm not.
That's the question I bring to the listeners is my unawareness of those kind of issues. And I grew up happy. Because I wasn't looking for those kind of things. I wasn't thinking of myself as a victim. I wasn't looking to be mistreated. So therefore, I wasn't, even if I was. So what is the harm of that? As opposed to having to prove and find every racist person out there and go up to their face and say, you're a racist and you're mistreating me and you're doing this. I feel great. And I may have missed opportunities to do that if somebody was treating me in a way just because I'm black, but the fact that I didn't know, didn't care, and went about my business doesn't make me less of a person. I always knew who I was, so why can't that be more of the trend as opposed to always going up and pointing fingers at people and just calling everybody in the world a racist for everything?
Come on, I dream about this. I have actual dreams about this, about busting the top people, the rich people, white people.
One of the scariest things about today's opioid epidemic for public health workers, police, and users is the makeup of the opioids themselves and how that's constantly changing. Pills that are sold illegally don't come with a list of ingredients, at least one that can be believed. And without clear identification, it's hard to treat overdoses and prosecute dealers. Max Blau has been reporting on this for Stat News. He's with us from Atlanta. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So first, just explain this idea that we don't really know what's in a drug. Like, how much can one dose of an opioid differ from another?
When we're talking about opioids, I think the first thing we need to realize is that there are different types. There are the ones that doctor may prescribe you. There is heroin. And then there are these other classes you may have heard of called synthetic opioids. Mm-hmm. They're known as fentanyl, carfentanil. And it's a very small amount of synthetic opioids that it takes to kill someone. And oftentimes when people are buying drugs on the street, the person buying the drug doesn't always know exactly what they're getting.
Right. And so it's one of the reasons we see so many overdoses is people just don't know the quantity that they're taking. You also, though, talk about this situation as a cat and mouse game between opioid dealers and law enforcement. Can you explain that?
So what you're seeing in some states as certain kinds of synthetic opioids are banned, that manufacturers of drugs are actually finding slightly different variants of synthetic opioid that is then manufactured and is technically legal. Oftentimes, some of these are just lab formulations that were created in like the 60s and 70s and never made it actually out into the world. People who are working in kitchens or other like homemade labs have been able to find them and create slightly different opioids that are legal only because there's never been a reason not to make them illegal.
Right. So you're like, oh, right, if I get caught with selling this particular formulation and it's been determined illegal, I'll just make a slightly different variation of it and I'll be fine.
And of course, with that, there is, none of these have been ever approved as a drug, rather, for either use in animals or humans. So
Give us a sense of the time pressure here. And once first responders, seize pills, how long does it take for them to identify what they actually are?
One of the things that's really been, hard for towns like Cincinnati or Macon or other ones that have seen these clusters of overdoses where dozens of people are suddenly going to the hospital or even dying within a matter of days or by the end of a weekend. One of the things that is a struggle is how do you get those drugs tested as fast as possible? And often what would happen if it was just maybe one person overdosing or one drug that was seized is that it would go to a crime lab and it would be at the bottom of the pile. And there would be a bunch of other cases ahead of that would have to get processed. And sometimes it could take weeks or a month to actually identify what that drug was.
You have also written that crime lab chemists are partnering with public health officials now to combat this epidemic. Can you give us an example of where this is working?
This has happened in Baltimore. The fire department there is the group that responds to overdoses. And when there is a uptick that is higher than usual in Baltimore, they alert the public health commissioner, who has this belief that, instead of waiting months or even a year for final data to come out on the public health side, by having imperfect data sooner about where overdoses are, she can send outreach workers there to a neighborhood or a block where overdoses are happening and get either people trained on how to use naloxone, just everyday residents, or to have health workers on hand in case there are more overdoses on the way.
Why isn't this being done more often and in more places?
I think part of the issue is that fentanyl hasn't hit the entire country to the same degree at the same time. So I think a lot of it is drugs come to a place and only after the fact are public health and law enforcement officials handling the issue.
Max Blau is the Southern correspondent for Stat News. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
I've always wanted to be a cop. With a uniform fit, we're calm to the seams. Peeing in niggas, call the greens, and they discuss the politics of dreams. That's why I've always wanted to be a cop.
Friday, we will pause to remember the victims of the July 7th ambush in Dallas. 5 police officers were killed that summer night when a lone gunman opened fire after a peaceful protest downtown.
The shooter was identified as Micah Johnson, and we know he acted alone. But for several hours that night, police were searching for another suspect, one that they had identified by mistake. Tonight, he explains how that night and one picture changed his life.
This is where I keep my flavors. I'm going to tell you, I got my Georgia peach, I got pineapple, white pina colada. This is where the magic happens at.
There's a good chance you don't know Mark Hughes, but you remember his face. For several hours on the night of July 7th, someone else's mistake made this father of 5 public enemy number 1.
Still to this day, people come up and say, I know you. You're the shooter.
We brought Mark back to where it all started. He was among the hundreds of people who showed up that night for a rally and march against police brutality.
It's a surreal feeling right now. There's a lot of emotions going on right now. It's actually like one of the first times I've been back.
Unlike many of the protesters, Hughes was armed that night. His rifle slung over his shoulder when gunfire erupted just a few blocks away.
He didn't want me to be mistakenly identified.
His brother Corey begged him to turn over his gun.
My first instinct was, well, I'm going to get my gun over if they're shooting. And that's when Corey took it upon himself to go get the police officers, like, take my brother's gun. I don't want them to mistake him as being the person that's shooting.
But that's exactly what happened.
Do not approach this suspect. We'll bring him to justice.
Dallas police released this photo of Hughes. He was now a suspect.
And the first thing that came to my mind was, they're going to kill me out here. I was angry. I was frightened. I feared for my life. I was confused, didn't know what to do.
So Hughes turned himself into police and gave detectives the business card of the officer who took his firearm.
He came back in the room, he said, I have good news and bad news for you. He said, I found the officer, you had your rifle, and he corroborated your story. The bad news is that I have witnesses that say they saw you shoot your rifle.
Hughes would ultimately be cleared, but the damage was done.
Even this place of peace was a place that was up under attack.
Almost immediately, the threats started.
There were notes left.
What did the notes say?
Stuff like cop killer, payback.
Those threats have stopped, but being downtown brings back the bitterness over the way he was treated by police.
I had a rifle out there. Bringing me in to question me, I have no problem with that. But to release me as the suspect, before you even spoke to me, before you had any evidence, that was reckless and dangerous.
Now, a year later, Hughes is trying to move forward. The Texas heat keeps him busy.
Yeah, buddy.
And this place has brought positivity back to his life.
Oh, man. Can't beat it with a bat.
So has his continued activism.
I'm not walking around with my head down. We have to believe that there's going to be change. For those that can't handle too much sugar, got sugar-free flavors.
This is the Mark Hughes you should know. He's done running, and he's doing whatever he can to be himself again.
I'm a man that's trying to make a living, provide for my family just like any other person.
I should point out it is legal to carry a long gun in public in Texas. I asked Hughes if he could do it all over again, would he still bring a loaded gun to the protests? He told me absolutely. He was out there marching for Philando Castile, a black gun owner killed by a police officer the day before. For Hughes, the gun wasn't for protection, it was a symbol. It took him 4 months to get his gun back, and he says he is still waiting on an apology from police. All this week, we're bringing you unique coverage of all the lives affected in this tragedy. We have much more for you right now at NBCDFW.com.
Thomas Jefferson's mistress Sally Hemings' secret living quarters finally discovered.
That was a headline I read online today that instantly caught me off guard. The story of the woman that Jefferson had multiple children with is a relatively well-known one in history, so to read the words mistress was jarring. Hemings was a slave, therefore the entire concept of consent is completely out of the window. What Jefferson did was rape a woman that he owned while keeping her right nearby in his home. It was gross, it was wrong, and she was certainly no mistress involved in some star-crossed romance. Many of the founding fathers of this nation owned slaves. That's an unavoidable fact. So, when you're passing down history lessons tomorrow at the family cookout, be sure you don't leave out any of those pesky details. You'd be doing your country a disservice. I'm Clinton Yates, and that's my take.
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Saturday, July 8th, 2017. So I have been told this is our weekly compensatory call-in. If you have suggestions, thoughts on some of the news segments, and certainly any of the other items that have happened over the past 7 days, other incidents, if you have thoughts that you would like to share, reports on those, dial in the number 641-715-3640. The code 564-943#. Press *6 if you would like to participate. Number again, 641-715-3640. The code 564-943#. Press *6 if you would like to participate. Couple quick things before we get to the callers. Number one, the infamous Crystal Tyler will be back on the cows this coming week. For folks, I know we have newer listeners. The archives, we've been on the air for 8.5 years at this point. Listener supported, counter-racist radio. The PayPal button, it is on my blog, racism-notes.blogspot.com. racism-notes.blogspot.com. When you go to the blog, you'll see the PayPal button in the top right corner. If you are not into PayPal, drop me an email. We will get you a physical mailing address. Gus T moved this month, so make sure you drop an email to confirm that you have the correct current mailing address. Thanks to all the folks who have supported, invested in the cows. Now, as I said, if you've not been listening to the cows for very long, the archives are extensive, more than 1,500 programs. Way back in 2014, Crystal Tyler, in the midst of, to put things in context, I think a lot of our listeners, or a good number of our listeners, they heard about Crystal Tyler. There was a Facebook video in the summer of 2014. Everybody, right, went down to Ferguson. Crystal Tyler, she and her crackhead black husband and their daughter, quote unquote interracial daughter, they all took the sojourn down to Ferguson to report and to promote her book, The Wheat Money. And she talked, about racism. I'm sure you can find the Facebook video easy. Anyway, she came on the program. She talked about her book, which is all about racism, white supremacy. Has actually a lot of great information about the history of Washington State, Seattle specifically, and black people's presence here. It explains how, because of the system of racism, white supremacy, her husband is now functioning as a crack addict, that is the system of white supremacy at work. It explains how she came to be in the position that she's in. We talked about all that on the program. She said explicitly the first time she was on the program, she said that she looked at her now crackhead black husband. She looked at him and said that she wanted his genetic material. You have to go back in the archives to get more of the details. She came back and did a second visit. Interestingly, everyone should be very alert, especially the listeners who heard, if you participated, if you got to ask questions, if you participated live, or if you study, you go back, you listen to the archives. This is a moment for keen study because Crystal Tyler asked to come back on the program. Now, anybody, white people, non-white people, I generally give a side eye to anybody who asks to come on the context of white supremacy because over the years, well, that's another story. But for Crystal Tyler, I was already this is someone I regard as a high-level race soldier. So now you want to come on, you must have some sort of agenda. In fact, that might be a good question. Why did you reach out to see if you could get an invite, come back and speak with us again? But I think folks should have some questions ready and really be alert, vigilant with your listening. Particularly, like I said, folks who are familiar with her a little bit. If you've read her book, she was giving the book out for free before. So if you want to read The Wheat Money, should be available. If you did not get a chance to get a free copy, put that on your question list as well. And the chicanery started early. As I said, now she reached out to me this week and said she wanted to come back on the program. She hadn't spoke with us in a while. I say, okay. Let's see, we'll look at something for next week. We pick a date this coming Monday. I wake up this morning and she says, well, wait a minute. I had a little trouble. I can still do Monday, but I work for a company in Japan and I've got, an engagement that would require me to step away for 20 minutes. I would have to leave. I can come right back, but it would require me to step away for business, and then I can come back and finish out, the rest of the broadcast. Now, again, she had just emailed me days before saying, let's do another broadcast, and I gave her a range of dates. She picked, let's do Monday, and then days later, wait a minute, I'm going to have to step away. Now, I don't recall us ever on the Cows doing, over that 8.5 years, I don't recall us doing an interview with someone where they left for a period of time and then returned to complete the end. Like this was planned and not, something happened. I got to sneeze really quick, but I'm going to leave for 20 minutes and then come back and talk to you. So already some things are looking, suspicious, but what to expect. Anyway, stay tuned, Crystal Tyler. Next. That segment where the black male victim of white supremacy who was adopted, that's one of those where I think one of the things that I end the program with and have been for some years is being patient with other black people. That's one of those where I think it's so important recognizing, I think the importance that victims, non-white people, black people in particular, are victims of white supremacy. Yes, we are subject to physical violence, but we also are victimized in terms of being given incorrect information so that we are confused about what is happening on this planet. That I thought was a really tragic illustration in that segment. And if you paid attention, the segment started out with Black people are so racist. Man, I get so much racism from black people. Man, those no good black people, just because I don't want to listen to all their hippity-hoppity music and I'm, expanding and appreciating other artists and everything that American culture has to offer. Then when it gets to white people actually terrorizing him on a regular basis, so, well, I don't need to chase them down and call them a racist. That's not going to define who. I mean, fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And I thought, what another brilliant illustration of Seattle. I cannot sit, particularly now that my physical address is in Seattle proper, I cannot emphasize enough that what an illustration. Like if I had grown up in Seattle, the cows would not exist. I would probably sound like that victim that you heard in that segment. This your program and this Gus guy, they are the most racist. That's probably what I would sound like. And that is a part of the violence of racism, white supremacy, confusing, confounding non-white people's understanding of what is happening on this planet. Next, I wrote that segment for dealing with black male teachers, the lack of black male teachers, 2% or less in the United States, and some of the difficulties that they experience, was published at Atlanta Black Star on Monday. Got great contribution from Dr. Curry, Dr. Travis Bristol. They've both been guests on the program, some of our listeners. Absolutely outstanding. Got, more contributions than I even was able to include in the piece. And I got a sizable amount of follow-up from black male teachers who either they heard, because I had solicited on Facebook, if people were interested in sharing to, contact me. I think some people read the piece or they heard on the program, previous broadcasts where I was talking about it. And a lot of black male teachers reached out subsequently to share and talk about their experience. So I thought, if folks are interested, we could probably just do a whole program and have black male educators participate and kind of talk about their experience, because there are not a whole lot of you all. So, it was a substantial number. I was quite surprised at the number of responses. So if the black male educators who participate in the cows, or if you all want to reach out to other black male educators who don't listen to the cows, but you think, hey, they might want to join in this sort of program to talk about their experiences, that would be phenomenal. We can make time. We can get it done this month. Let me know if you would be interested. untiljustice@gmail.com. untiljustice@gmail.com. Let's see if we can get it done this month. Next. The incident, I don't know if people saw it, happened very recently. There was a young black male. He was in his early 20s. He was visiting in Greece, and they say like a mob of white thugs, race soldiers, killed him. This happened, I think, within the last couple of days. And there was another incident. It was a young black female. She died. I think it was some sort of tragic arrangement where she died suspiciously at the pool at her residence. This is, a few days or weeks before she's about to marry the suspected racist. Just alcohol, white people. And I said specifically this week because it's supposed to be the holiday and all that celebrating, but just in general, it is such a bad combination. That is one. It was never presented to me like that, particularly when I was younger, that, you don't want to drink alcohol because we are in a system of racism. And if you are not sober, you're not going to be able to think well. You're not going to be able to make quality decisions. And you especially do not want to be drinking around white people because they love to take advantage of and abuse black people who are under the influence. Remember Solomon Northup? We did that on the book club. Long list of black people who have had problems with this sort of behavior. Remember James Byrd? He was under the influence. That was why he asked for a ride from his white friends who ended up, lynching him, basically. At any rate, alcohol, white people, horrendous combination all the time. Last thing I'll get in, that segment on Sarah Vaughan, I wasn't going to play it because I feel like a lot of times these whites, one of the ways that they practice racism, white supremacy, they thoroughly study black people, important black people, study them, make lots of money off of them, particularly when they are dead. And then, write these books and what have you as the resident white expert on said, deceased Negro. I feel like they do that sort of thing all the time. I thought some of the elements were important on that, just getting some of the different ways that she experienced racism, white supremacy, and the black self-respect that she had to not tolerate their just tacky and trashiness. And we're going to put you down here in the furnace on some sort of shabby cot or what have you. I mean, come on. But I also thought that piece was important because of the white male caller who dialed in, where they're giving all this evidence. And this is a white woman, right? Giving all this evidence. This is documented. These things happened. Not that this should be surprising for this area. I mean, it was way worse for most black people. This was like I was even going to use that other P word, but this is a black person who was doing a little bit better than a lot of other black people of this time period, right? I don't think Sarah Vaughan's experience was representative of most black people in the U.S., in the 1940s, 50s, right? For this race soldier to call in, be like, oh man, I don't want to hear all this about, she had racism and racism was a problem. Everybody loved her. Standard operating procedures. Like, you have to have at least one white person if it's going to be some sort of public forum where there's even maybe a little slight bit of accurate information about racism, white supremacy being discussed. You have to have at least one individual classified as white on their job to say, oh, no. I dispute that. That is not the case. You all are making this up. That is nonsense. We do not want, we want the conversation to sound like, get that black guy from Seattle back in here. Get him back. What are you talking about? She was a victim and all this. That is hogwash. Get back up. Talk about those racist black people again. I will conclude there. If I could request, if you could take 5 minutes to share whatever thoughts, insight you have, suggestions. That way everybody has an opportunity to share. Once everybody speaks, it gets their one time in. If you have other comments or questions that you want to share, we should have ample time for that after everyone has spoke their first time. Also, if I could make a request, we could not use metaphors for the compensatory call-in. That is exclusive to this broadcast. I don't ask that any other time. If we could not use metaphors, it's been my experience, or it is my conclusion. Racists, one of the ways that they practice racism is by using analogies, similes, comparisons between separate things that are not equal. They do this sort of thing all the time, and it just produces rampant confusion. Non-white people, we are still learning. We are very confused. You can put Gus T Renegade. I am highly confused, still learning. But in our confusion, sometimes we will employ metaphors to convey our thoughts, hoping that accurately promotes our message. Often it does not. Again, it just transmits a lot of confusion and just a lack of clarity on this broadcast. If we could be explicit, direct to what it is that we want to say, I would really appreciate it. I will prompt about that and be mindful of it myself. Much obliged. If you know you're in a noisy environment, if you could watch the background noise, just use your mute button. If you know you got music on or the television or other people being a little rowdy, really appreciate it. Just helps to maintain the quality of the broadcast. With that, we will get to the folks who dialed in. Thank you kindly. First few folks who have a hand up, line should be open.
Can I be heard?
I heard both Thomas and our young caller in the Bay Area. I guess we'll try and get our young caller first and then get Thomas in.
Absolutely.
Okay. Greetings, Gus, and to the rest of the callers. So just based on the segment towards the black adoption in Seattle, I've always felt like that was just the adoption of such a sort for black children is just a way for white people to use them in such a matter. Like, for example, I've always felt like around at least 65% of the time when white couples go to adoption centers, they would usually aim for the black children as they are young, either male or female, but they, just based on my knowledge, they would most likely go for the black male because they have that sort of power and strength to be able to, I think, manipulate it the most. And I feel like with this power to be able to, for white people to be able to adopt black children, I feel like it just connects in such a way back to slavery, just in terms of being able to manipulate a black person into thinking that white is always right. Just by doing that, just by being sweet to them, thinking that the white people actually love them when they actually despise them and don't want to be around them. They don't. I just feel like if the white people try to take the black children away from their parents, from their actual parents, it's just going to make things worse for the child because I would say that it's just going to take their minds off of the war that we are actually in. It's just going to keep them focused on something else like sports or anything other than the system of white supremacy. They won't teach them about that. If anything, they'll get on the border of it, just explain what racism is in the most vague way. And it's just, I just feel like that, I wouldn't say it's a problem, I just feel like it's something that should be noticed, at least in the United States. I don't know how it goes globally, but nationwide, this is a thing that goes on, especially in Seattle, like you specifically stated. And yeah, that's how I feel towards the adoption of black children by white couples. And just based on another one of the segments, let's see. Based on another one of the segments, towards the very last segment, where I think someone shot a cop, I think, if I'm correct, but someone shot a police officer. I think they handled a weapon just because it was a protest based on a black person who was shot by a police officer. If I'm correct, I think this person was a suspect before evidence was even put out, like just something like that. And I just feel like in that sense, that's a problem right there too, because according to the media, people are going to care more about the fact that cops are being shot instead of the fact that cops are shooting black people. The media, I also feel like the media will make it seem like people care about the police brutality towards black people, but it's just like a huge problem when somebody's suspected to kill another police officer, when just a random person just goes ahead and shoots a police officer. That's just a huge problem to society. They need to be stopped. They need to be put in jail. They need to be taken away from us. They need to go back to where they came from, quote unquote. But when it's a police officer shooting a black person, it just goes straight to, I thought he had a gun. It was black on black crime. It was just something like, this is some nonsense that won't even make any sense at all. And I just feel like in that certain case, that's a problem as well. I am not sure yet of how to solve that specifically for myself, but I feel like I'm not sure on that topic of how to resolve it, but I feel like everybody just needs to notice what's going on and how the media twists our opinion towards things. And just one more thing, just something I saw yesterday on social media. I realized that next month is the anniversary of August 24th of last year in Newark. This 10-year-old child was chased by a series of police officers, claiming that he was a suspect. Well, not a suspect, but he looked something like a robber that they were looking for. And when I saw the pictures of both of the people on Facebook, I actually saw a distinct figures, like distinct features of the nose, and that's about it. And I just felt like that was complete nonsense for just in general police officers to like aim shotguns at a 10-year-old child who literally rolled a basketball into a street, and they were about to kill him until neighbors interfered. And I feel like if those neighbors hadn't interfered, they would have literally killed this child and not even ask him questions. They wouldn't ask for identification. They would just go ahead and shoot him. And even if that was the robber, I feel like they would just have ruined it too. It's just like, I just feel like I stated multiple times, the black parents in this society needs to teach their children about these types of things, because I feel like we as a whole need to wake up towards these situations. As I learned previously, we are in a war, and we can't just be sugarcoating everything, just thinking that everything's all happy and stuff for us, when it's really not. It's just, I just feel like we need to learn. We just need to learn from this. And I know it's kind of vague, but that's all I would like to share, and thank you for taking my call.
Well said, young man. I thought not vague at all. Right to the point. Young male. Just accustomed to saying that, but definitely appreciate your observations. Touched on so many different things. I think a lot of folks agree with your assessment of adoption. I think we've long taken the position that it's an active war. One of the many ways that racists wage war against black people and black children specifically. I know Dr. Welsing would say, when you play around with sex, the joke is on the offspring all the time. And absolutely you can connect that with his final comments as well in terms of the way that children are treated. And I would certainly echo all of us. I think we need to make sure we're doing our best to share information, particularly with black children, to make sure that they understand the war that's being waged against us, so that they can be a little less confused, better prepared to defend themselves. Thank you for your patience, Thomas in New York. Did you have commentary, sir?
Yes, I do, guys. Thank you very much. And thanks to the Bay Area call. I just want to say to him, I'm glad that he's forming opinions and his own opinions, because so many of the young people that I work with, in their 20s, everything with them has to come from something that they read on social media. It's like they won't make an opinion of their own. I sometimes let them rant, and then I say, okay, so now what do you think? And it's like they get stuck, like, oh, I'm not supposed to do that. Somebody's supposed to think for me, So I'm glad that you're trying to think for yourself. Very good. Gus, I'm glad you have Crystal Tyler back. I might need to call out of work that night to be able to fully participate in that one. And I just wanted to say about her one thing that you left. Well, you didn't leave it out, but this was a racist mother and raising a black child, or did she have multiple children? I know she had one. And she's a top-tier racist up there with C.O.W.S and Lacey Swartz moms, and they all have black children. It's very telling. The joke is on the children, like you just said. I wanted to know, have a question for anyone from Atlanta. I just have a question regarding living in a black utopian society. So I just wanted to ask them a question if there's anyone from that area on the show. One of the clips you played, it was funny because I had wrote this down, and it was sort of expounded upon on one of your clips. It's about the white opiate addiction. And as you know, in New Jersey, the governor, Chris Christie, a.k.a. Humpty Dumpty, now he's going to be in charge of the opium drug problem in America. He's going to be leaving office, I guess, after this election. So they on New Jersey 12, which is New Jersey's version of, I guess, New York 1, they had this state congressman on talking about the opium addiction in New Jersey and how come the abuse has spread so far, and how come the state is so far behind, and, you know, what exactly is Christie going to do in the country, being that New Jersey is one of the worst states with the white opium addiction. And this guy said, well, you know, the problem is that it got out of control because we thought that the opium addiction was just going to stay in the inner cities. We never thought it was going to leave the inner cities. So once it left the inner cities, you know, that's when it got out of control. So I was just thinking, all the years we've had opium problems in the inner cities, nothing was done. Now, you know, once again, they're going to do something. But I just thought it was telling that he admitted, you know, that, hey, this was an inner city thing. It was no big deal. And I think we all need to invest in fentanyl stocks. You know, let's get as many of these people out of here as possible. Sarah Vaughan, that was a very good clip that you played about her. And that last call, I had wrote that down too. I mean, just coming in to do what white people do. Jay-Z has the Anti-Defamation League after him because of a comment he made on Jewish people owning property, which I thought was very interesting. The black farmers seem to be under attack worldwide, not just here. And this was in recent times. This wasn't like something we could say was in 19 whatever. I mean, this was under George Bush, our two so-called black presidents. I mean, and this guy was denied loans and going put through all this, and still in court today, and nothing's being done about it. He's out his house. I mean, it's just terrible. The black guy who was very confused, that white woman who was interviewing, who seemed like she knew him and grew up with him, she let him dress up like a Klansman. I don't care how white people ain't ignorant. She let him dress up like a Klansman. She should have told him, bro. But she didn't care because she's a racist. And the last part I wanted to mention, the brother with the gun in Houston. I can't believe it's been a whole year since that whole thing went down. But the witnesses who lied and said they saw him shooting the gun should have been charged with filing a false police report. Because, you know, that's what white people do. They always saw something that didn't happen. And it brought me back to the brother who bought the air rifle or the pellet gun in Cleveland or in Ohio, Crawford, who was in the store, John Crawford III. And the white woman says, you know, she calls the police, or it was a guy, a white man, called the police, made this report like this guy was pointing the guns at people. I mean, this man was on the phone. And same thing, same exact thing. I'll mute my line. Thank you, Gus.
Absolutely. Almost reminds me of the time they saw that guy brushing his teeth and called the police and reported. Never mind. Other folks who dialed in and we have not heard from, line should be open. Feel free.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Greetings, everyone. Yes, I'll start off when I say Sarah Vaughan is synonymous with self-respect. Number two, I have down here mistreating black farmers, I suspect, corrupts the chain of operations of non-white people feeding ourselves, you know, through the chain of getting food from the ground to the grocery stores. Primarily, our only contact with food is through the grocery stores, and it's apparent that white people are determined that that's going to be the only access that we have, at least in this part of the world. Some parts of the world, not even with that. There are still going on steady incidents of black people being shot to death by white law enforcement and white non-enforcement people. I thought it was an interesting story about the land issue in South Africa, where the white gentleman was saying, even though I know it was wrong, still ain't giving up that land. You know, in other words, I'm going to I'd rather be a racist white supremacist. Get over it. That's basically what he's saying. I am pleased over the evidence of Venus Williams at least being exonerated for it not being her fault, with those greedy white people who are trying to sue her. Maybe that will corrupt their case, so she won't have to give them some of her money, some of her hard-earned money. The story about the adopted non-white children, the non-white victim of racism, white supremacy. I really don't believe the testimony. I don't think it's authentic, because the first question comes to my mind is, did they have a television? All of the racism, white supremacy is on television that shows you about race, and I'm pretty sure he doesn't sound like he's like 80, 90 years old, when the only thing was going on was a radio or something like that. So I'm just not going for it as far as that's concerned. And I'll just say out that the white person in part in the interview was lying. What I have here else here. The person seemed to, he seemed to be in denial. I have that down here of a lot of things. And I agree with your assessment. I heard that with the white person, I suspect was practicing racism, talking about with Miss Vaughan, that I love her music, but all of that stuff about racism was around. It's always a white person, like I say, it's always a white person that's like that'll bring that out, bring that lie out like that. So I'm not surprised. And last but not least, I would just say VGQ, but wearing an assault rifle in public is not smart to me. But VGQ to the victim who did it, and I think he said he would do it again, VGQ. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Right on, retired firefighter. Other folks that we have not heard from who have a hand up, line should be open. Feel free.
Can I be heard? Greetings.
I heard both of you.
Go ahead, caller. Okay, thanks a lot. Greetings to you, Gus, and greetings to all the callers and listeners. Two things I just want to comment on in regards to the recordings. I know the male non-white adoptee who talked about his experience in Seattle. I think somebody touched on it earlier about how it's important, not just adopted black people with white parents, but just all of us have to teach our children about racism, because you get this confusion here, and more so, I think his confusion was more intentional than anything. They basically tried to just, make him believe that there was a world where either racism didn't exist or racism isn't that bad. So, but I know with us black parents, we have to, we're still learning. So we're still a little bit, we're still in the process of learning ourselves about the system of racism, white supremacy. So it's very important to, teach our children at an early age, so they won't be as confused as, just say us as a people as we're growing up. The farmer, the black farmer, or the farmer in South Africa. Now that was an interesting piece, because that right there encompasses the system of white supremacy, as I see it, because, and this has been repeated many times before about how white people are not ignorant about racism. They know our history, and it's like he didn't even care. And it also goes to show you that racism is not something that white people are going to end. We are going to have to end it. and we're going to have to do something to force them to end it, because white people will not stop being racist. So, you know, it is the job of non-white people to replace this system with a system of justice. So it was a perfect example of why white people are not going to stop being racist. I mean, the guy basically just said, I know it's wrong. I know we took their land, but I don't care because I got it and we got all the power. So, you know, it's just, yeah, like I said, white people are not going to end racism. So that's all I have for now. Mute my line.
Appreciate that. The other caller who chimed in?
Greetings. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yes, greetings, Gus. Greetings to the callers and listeners. Jay out of New York. Just giving a call to make a couple of comments on the clips. Great clips, by the way, Gus. Sorry I wasn't able to send in anything this week. The continued terrorism in reference to that farmer from these white suspected racists that are debilitating, smothering, and not supporting the non-white black businesses. It just seems to be a continual theme that continues to get worse from what I'm seeing. The one thing that I got from the clip is here a family lost their farm, which also was their place of residence, just trying to operate a business to sustain themselves. The reporter doesn't even mention the fact that, you know, here his wife is sick, seemed like she, you know, was going through a very difficult time, but now they're homeless. But the reporter stresses the fact that the sheriff took the dogs that the farmer owned since they were puppies. And that seemed to be like a big thing, not mentioning anything about the homeless position that they're in right now and everything that happened. Just kind of strikes me as, you know, kind of what they do, but I kind of, that stood out to me at the end. I agree with the firefighter in reference to the grocery stores and also trying to siphon out that connection to black farmers. I did notice I was in Camden, New Jersey 2 weeks ago. One of the larger grocery chains in the Camden, New Jersey area that services heavily melanated population in that area has like a police station within the grocery store. First time I've ever seen anything like this. It's like a little mobile police station, but it's there. It's not something that they kind of take in. I shouldn't even say mobile. It's actually like within the grocery store. That actually got my brain thinking in terms of what's to come next, because I've never seen anything like this in any of the areas that are dominated, you know, by the suspected racist white individuals kind of throughout the New Jersey or even New York areas. So I'm kind of keeping an eye on that. I'm going to probably do a little bit of research on that too. I did read an article in the WashingtonWeekly.com that spoke about the decline of black businesses in the last 20 to 40 years. I'm going to send a link over to you, Gus, but it did really kind of focus on multiple declines, and this is in the insurance industry, this is in the banking. I think they specified black banks, I think they had about 48 different black banks in 1985. And now I think there's only a total of 11 or 12 banks still existing and more to close. So continual decline of black businesses throughout the U.S. market. I did want to thank the young scholar in the Bay Area for what he mentioned and to keep up, as Thomas mentioned, to just keep up the great work that you're doing. I do let my kids listen to the comments that he makes, because I think sometimes as I'm kind of trying to impart information on them and they're coming back to me, they feel isolated because, you know, unlike other kids that are in their age bracket that are not talking about the same things, it's good to hear from somebody else that's kind of close to their age that are kind of in that codified environment as well. So thank you for that and kind of keep up the good work. The terroristic white supremacist farmer, I took this quote down. What am I going to do? Just turn around and give my land to some Bushman. And like the last caller said, these folks are very, very knowledgeable about this system, and they're going to do everything to maintain it. I wanted to point out that the excavation that they did, I'm pretty sure that there was a lot of money made from that excavation, and he's continuing to make money from it. And because he said that the land was his, pretty sure all the profits are going back to him, while other people are, the melanated individuals, the indigenous people, are just happy to be kind of finding out that, of course, that they're the original inhabitants of that land, but the money is still going back to this terroristic individual in that area. I'll kind of pause for now and let somebody else come in, and I'll kind of mention the other pieces that I have later. Thanks for your time. Bye.
Appreciate the commentary. Oh, yes, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Steele.
Awesome. This is Ken Steele, and I'm currently in Chino, California. And I wanted to start my report this evening by making a correction to some information that I provided during the workplace racism segment a couple of days ago. The victim of racism that was accused of sexual harassment that worked at Fox News was an anchor by the name of Charles Payne. My apologies for mistaking him with another black newscaster from Fox News, but sometimes names tend to confuse me. So that is Charles Payne. He is the victim who has been accused of sexual harassment and sexual misconduct working at Fox News. What I wanted to report on this week is I know it was touched upon earlier by Gus, but there was a victim of racism that was recently beaten to death in Greece. His name was Bakari Henderson. And if you go to his Facebook page, I believe that Facebook has deactivated it or put him on the not active list, so you can't go ahead and friend him. It actually says now remembering Bakari Henderson. I'm on his page right now. And if you go on Bakari Henderson's page, you'll notice that in all of the pictures that are visible, he seems to be surrounded by suspected racists in every single one of these photos. That includes other people. He's frequently pictured beside suspected white supremacist females as well. I did a little bit of research on him, and I found out that he was also a member of a Greek fraternal organization, but this was a white Greek fraternal organization, and he was also said to be in Greece at the time with the aspirations of starting a business. He was a business student at the University of Arizona. So, you know, I wanted to say I was doing my research on this guy, and man, I felt really bad because I'll admit that I could have easily been this person at one point in my life. You know, in my more confused days in college, I was a heavy drinker, and it wasn't something that I decided to do on my own volition. This was definitely a mode of behavior that I had picked up from hanging out with suspected racists. When I was younger, it was easy for me to look at suspected race because of the fact that I was raised in a small rural community. It was easy for me to see these suspected racists as people that you could easily just ignore and avoid. But when I got to the college level, you know, they just had so much money and they were doing so much better than me that, you know, they convinced me to engage in a lot of behaviors that I otherwise wouldn't do. I suspect that Bakari Henderson was convinced by his class, or by his frat brothers and by the suspected racists that were surrounding him to go on this trip. I'm sure that he was encouraged by them to be extremely familiar with them while under the influence of alcohol. And I'm sure that some of his buddies even witnessed him being killed and did not do anything to intervene. And all of these things are occurrences that I've had similar experiences with. And, I just want to say it's imperative that we teach younger victims of racism that, yes, racism is real. Yes, it is happening right now. Yes, there are people that are doing it. And, yeah, your so-called white friends are oftentimes going to be the catalyst for the extreme incidences of racism to be exercised upon you. And that's exactly what happened with Bakari, and it's happened to me in the past. I've been assaulted, beaten up, and hospitalized by suspected racists, after a night of drinking at one point in my life. And, after that incident, I had a concussion that lasted for about a month. I still am not, I still can feel that I'm not 100%. And this happened over 5 years ago. And all of that could have been avoided on my part had I known better than to, cavort with suspected racists and to engage in their, alcohol-fueled endeavors. So I really, really would implore all of us to make a point to communicate to young people just how real the threat of racism, white supremacy is, just how real the threat is, even with the people that have identified themselves as our buddies or our friends. And we got to reach people at a younger age, because this stuff doesn't start in college. This starts in the formative years. And man, it's just so hard to see somebody go out like this. Rest in peace and rest in power to Bakari Henderson. Sorry that it had to be you. I hope other people can learn from some of the mistakes that were made that led to your untimely demise. Thank you so much.
Well said, Mr. Steele. Very important. Hopefully, as you said, people can, learn something from this tragedy, and especially him being so young. I think he had just graduated, if I'm not mistaken, from the University of Arizona. But absolutely. And particularly sharing, personally, I think a whole lot of us listening on this call right now, or folks listening to the archives, people who have spoke, people who are, going to share something this evening, can say, oh, yeah, I was there when I was confused about racism, white supremacy, and hanging out, had my white pals, my white buddies, didn't think they would ever, do anything to me. And it easily could have been us. I know a lot of folks have talked about that down through the years. So, yeah, we just try and do better as we know more, learn more, and try and share that information with others, especially young people. He was 23, especially young people. And unfortunately, morbid reminder, I just watched this morning, I kid you not, I turned on Little Boxes to watch. I've mentioned it before. I think the film is hilarious. We've talked about it. I turned it on to watch a segment of it as I was nodding off very early this morning. I get up. I go to look at the news. Nelson Ellis dies at the age of 39 today from heart complications, if I'm remembering the report correctly. Nelson Ellis, he was the black male of people who saw True Blood on HBO. He was the gay cook. And I said with Little Boxes, I think I mentioned it on a compensatory call-in recently because I just heard about the film, that his character in Little Boxes
he is a writer, and he's writing, basically doing like food reviews, almost an homage to his True Blood character. But him being dead at 39 from heart complications, in my view, that is racism, white supremacy. It takes an astronomical toll on the health of black people. 39 years old, Nelson Ellis passes away today. Other folks that we've not heard from as well?
Have you heard?
Yes, sir.
Good evening, Gus. Good evening to the callers. This is the voice from Florida. Yeah, I heard that same thing too, and it really shocked me because he was young and he was in the becomings of being one of my favorite actors, and I was just shocked when I saw the news, and it just to me, first thing I just thought of was like, through all the terroristic treatment that he's probably dealt with. I mean, he's been on the set for True Blood for a while, and just to be around them so much and to deal with so many different angles of it, and then a medical apartheid, just a combination of everything at hand, it was just sad. It was just a sad moment for me. I also wanted to talk about the Neely Fuller, the clip you played. I think it's very important. I don't know if people overlook that statement, but when he said that in order for anything else to be solved, you have to solve racism. If you don't solve racism first, then everything you're fighting for, it's just not going to be successful. And when he said that, I started thinking about, when you have victims of white supremacy that are out here fighting for gay liberated rights, and you are fighting for equality to be a homosexual person in society, but yet when you go inside your own realms of your own LGBT community, you're still facing racism. I seen an article that had there were club owners that said they only wanted white gays only. So you're fighting for a community that is not even fighting for you. They're just using you to fight for their agenda, but once they get their agenda accomplished, then you're still on the outs of still racism. The feminists, same way. With the black feminists, I don't see none of them. They never attack any of the main white terroristic suspected supremacists out here. It's always black feminists teaming up with white supremacists for their agendas. I don't see any of them. I had went on Twitter, and there was a famous white feminist that was on there. I asked her, I said, hey, Black China, she's been raked through the coals in the media. Where's the feminist? Where's the white feminist? Where's the black feminist? You got this white guy who puts up her nude pictures on social media. And what I'm waiting for, because I find it very interesting, and what I'm waiting for is that the revenge porn law in California states that if you pose any revenge porn on a mate, that you're likely liable to seek jail time. So I'm waiting to see if he'll get his fair share of jail time or any type of punishment. But you can only wait and assume for that. It's something that you just know it's a long shot for it to happen, or you see it happening. But just to see how that plays out, I'm just wondering about that. The NRA, same thing with Philando Castile. They fight for everybody. Hey, we're gun owners. You're part of our organization. We have to fight against people that's not out here trying to ban guns. But when it comes down to Philando Castile, NRA just backs out. They don't have nothing to say. With the confused victim of racism, as I was listening to him, he said the part where he was being chased or, followed by the truck of these suspected racists, and they were yelling out the N-word towards him, and he says, oh, I did it a couple times, but I ended up finding another route that was longer, and I took that instead. But I really didn't have a problem with that, and I don't see it as a problem. And I'm in my head like, oh my gosh, like it's so real, because there's a lot of victims that are confused like that, and they don't understand when you understand terroristic white supremacy, they go from different levels. It'll start off saying the N-word, but I guarantee you, if he kept making that same routine with that mind frame that it was just the N-word and I would bypass it as nothing bad, I guarantee you, after his fifth ride, they would have started throwing stones. If he would have kept going and avoided that, it would have been probably chasing him with a knife, or somebody would have ended up grabbing a gun, their dad's gun, and it would have escalated, because that's what happened. They escalate their violence if they see that it started, you're resistant to it, and it just gets to another level. So as victims, you cannot take things like that lightly. You have to take it seriously. I did want to say, I say to everybody out there in Chicago, like I was telling everybody, and I know Gus says it all the time, when you got to be codified about your ways of going around and how you maneuver. I remember before the holiday came, I told you guys that I'm very codified when it comes to, there's 2 days I don't leave my house. I don't leave my house on 4th of July, and I don't leave my house on New Year's Eve. You cannot decipher the difference between fireworks and gunshots. And now in this, where the elevation of terrorism is just shot up, where I just felt like it was just a purge in time for people to go out there and really, go after killing blacks. And when I heard Chicago, 30 seconds. When I heard Chicago said 100 killings and 14 getting shot, it brought me back to the five officers that got probation for killing black people during Katrina. So I think that in Chicago during that time, all of that is not gang related. I think white people were out there shooting and killing blacks, and I'll mute my line and I'll talk back later. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Appreciate that. I know Pam, who's spoken with us before, she's a Chicago resident, Chicago native even. I think she's given a similar opinion repeatedly when they give those grisly numbers about the number of black people who died in Chicago over a given time period, and saying she does not think all of that is just, what they call gang-related and black-on-black crime and all that. She thinks that is absolutely coordinated white violence, and they just come in and kill black people or do whatever they want and then just blame it on black people. She and other people have postulated a similar theory as well. It's not just Pam and the call that you just heard from. Other folks that we've not heard from at all, the number again, 641-715-3640, the code 564-943#. Press *6 if you would like to participate. Other folks we've not heard from at all, if you had a hand up, feel free.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Greetings to you, the host, the callers, and the listeners. This is Monticello. As far as the clips that I heard about land and white people on our land around the world, I would just say, we will remove white people off of our land in this generation, and we'll remove them out of this existence in this generation. But I wanted to clarify. I know I keep talking about the term white, but I think it's important. So if you don't mind, I do want to just clarify what I've been saying. So I choose to identify the core group of white people as ice albinos. That's just what I've chosen. I'm not saying that the terminology system of white supremacy is problematic. I think that terminology is descriptive and it's accurate. Accurate, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, and but the term white is not descriptive enough, not in my view. Again, the Moors classified as free white persons in certain documents, but they don't have what we would call white power. And also, like I went on a couple of dates with the darkest lady that I've ever seen, a very beautiful lady from South Sudan. She had 2 white American parents. But she came here to America from Egypt, and just by coming here from America to America from Egypt, I believe she would be able to be classified as white on the census. So it's just that confusion is my situation, and also when I had mentioned about the class that I had went to, the Pan-African Studies class, the white ICE albino female in the Pan-African Studies class was comfortable with the black students suggesting counter-violence against whites to end white supremacy. But when I said she should stop being white, she concluded that she would have to kill herself. She said she would have to kill herself. And she only reported me to the head of the Pan-African Studies Department. She didn't report any of the other black people. And I think that may be telling. Another thing is, so I'm wondering, how can we identify the core group of white people and what they look like? How can we identify them from the group of white people that I would say are on the periphery? They're not exactly the core group. I would say the core group of white people are the ones that have the power to classify and declassify people as white. And I would just say, can we agree that the core group of white people are the ones that came from Europe and after the last ice age, the ones that came from Europe and are now occupying our land all over the world, the ones who have invaded, and I would just say, okay, so if we are to use counter-violence, who do we focus on? How do we identify who? If just some group of people say, you know what, we're going to use counter-violence against these white people. Well, how do we know who to focus on visually? Because I really think these white people are using the visuals, their visual perception to identify who they're going to classify as white, and I think that we can pick up on, even more in depth how they're classifying each other, of the people who share these genetic and phenotypic characteristics, especially in terms of coloration, perhaps the last or 2 last types are what may be considered the core group of white people who have the most white power. And then I compiled a list of people in what I think is the order of coloration or some coloration. So there's Robert Mugabe, who probably wouldn't be classified as white, Wesley Snipes, Chris Rock, Barack Obama, George Zimmerman, and Howard Stern, and Anderson Cooper. I would say Anderson Cooper may be the phenotypic, the coloration that is the most white, is the one that has the most white power. Then Howard Stern might be also, but Howard Stern, I think, is classified as a Jew, and then by some people who classify as white, he's sometimes white, sometimes he's not. And then the last thing I would say is I have concluded that these ICE albinos, these white people, are currently stuck in this existence by their survival instinct. And we need to help them leave this existence. We must grant them this necessity. I think it's very, very important. Thank you.
Appreciate it. If we have other folks, thanks for the clarification. If we have other folks who have not shared at all, please do not wait until the last minute. 641-715-3640, the code 564943#. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. Star 6-1 if you want to get through the process. Star 6-1. I think Noel Ignatieff, one of our guests from way back, like way back, 2009. I think that was the main part of his stance, quote-unquote, race traitor. I think that used to be his website. Sometimes it works, sometimes it does not, if you want to visit the website. But that was kind of his core theme. White people need to stop being white. I think he even talked about that when he was a guest on the program. You can go back in the archives, summer of 2009. It's been 8 years, it's been 8 years since he was on the In fact, he was on the program the day of Michael Jackson's funeral. I think those events were simultaneous. Anyone that we missed completely, folks who dialed in with a hand up that we have not heard from at all?
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you very much, sir. Greetings to Gus, the host, the listeners and callers. The first start out with the gentleman that just spoke. A lot of the questions he was asking is very thought-provoking. I would have to think on those just to come up with what my response would be to give an accurate response. But as far as the audio segment, I think it was the part where I think it was a famous singer, a musician from back in the day. That caller that called up, I guess he said he was like 80 or 85 or something. And, you know, like as what was said before, just a constant denial that racism wasn't a problem then and now, you know, saying, well, I don't care if they're black, purple, or polka dot green or whatever imaginary colors he came up with. You know, it's very interesting how they can just constantly deny that existed. And then one part of it where it was interesting how they said somebody was describing, I guess, some kind of image talking about her jawline or something like that, or the shape of her chin, going in descriptive detail about how they thought that she was beautiful or something, and how the beauty standard was blonde-haired, blue-eyed white women, and how, quote-unquote, Americans, okay, so that was way too abstract, because back then they were very clear about who is white and who was non-white, or, you know, the term colored or Negro. So I don't know what was meant by Americans. He should have just said white people, or at least white Americans. One last thing was, or two things was, I know people have talked about the Confederate flag. There's another flag that I've been seeing down here in Florida. It's called, it says, "Don't Tread on Me." It's a yellow flag, and it's got like a snake on it or something. There's something else. I couldn't remember what it was, but I constantly see that flag along with the red, white, and blue Confederate flag. And I mentioned that to go into this article or this report that's come up down here in Alachua County. Our NAACP head president, Evelyn Fox, a victim of racism, she woke up to a Confederate flag in her front yard. I think it was maybe like a little after 4th of July. I think like Wednesday or Thursday. So she was saying how it hasn't only been that has occurred, or that sense of racism. She said that she's been getting death threats, and she said the one that made her report it to the police was she got a call at like 1:10 a.m., like 1 in the morning, and the guy was saying that, you know, we're going to kill your black ASS, and, you know, the suspected race soldier said that he was KKK or something like that. And, you know, she said she reported it to the police and the FBI. So I didn't notice that it was a report here locally. I had to look hourly to like Jacksonville or something. So other than that, that's pretty much all I have. And just wanted to know, has anybody heard of that "Don't Tread on Me" flag? It's a yellow flag, and that's all I have for now.
The "Don't Tread on." Well, one, did we miss anybody? Anyone who dialed in with a hand up that we missed completely? Anybody that we missed totally? Do we? Princess, thank you for not waiting till the last 5 minutes. Good to hear from you.
No, I was just getting off work, like literally. I just got out of work. I heard the tail end of the caller was talking about, I guess, the flag. I am familiar with that flag because I see it a lot down here where I'm at in Central Florida. I think I had shared a number of years ago when, I guess, after Obama had gotten elected, I saw a lot of white people, a lot of white males in particular, wearing the shirt that had stated, "Men have guns, slaves don't." But yeah, I've seen that flag before, as well as, you know, some of the shirts that they wear. But I also, if it's okay with Gus, because it's real hard. It's been real hard for me to call on Thursdays for workplace racism. Is it all right if I can discuss a few things that have happened and offer some advice to one of the callers?
Proceed. Always welcome.
Okay. Well, within the last week, I haven't met with the person for corporate since our last meeting, but there have been some, I guess you could say, immediate changes. The white male that had been giving me a lot of problems here, he was, without any explanation, he was made to leave. And so they located him to another store. But the thing about it is that I had been, trying to get a transfer to another store completely out of the district, and they were basically trying to block me from that and offer me a position where I was just floating. In other words, I would basically be demoting myself to a lesser position and having to, fight to get hours. So when that didn't fall through, they brought in another assistant store manager at this location, and because there had been changes in the pay scale, they're no longer on salary. So they needed to be able to boot out another hourly employee in order to, take that assistant store manager into our store. So overall, I guess they're doing things behind the scenes. I did find out that the district manager that I have this complaint against, he visited the store this morning, and he does this a lot because I hardly ever get to see him in person while I'm there working. He either is there when before I get into work or after I leave. So it's kind of like a lot of behind the scenes action that's going on. I don't count it as a victory. I'm just, going through the process of, what Mr. Fuller told me as far as, I shouldn't have to worry about saying too much of anything right now. I'm just going through the motions of, them, giving me due process and going along with the investigation. But I did want to offer some advice to, I guess it was a female caller that was having a bit of trouble out in Tennessee with seems like a very intense workplace racism episode. I would just say that, when I was going through a lot of stuff after I left Comcast a few years ago, or when I got fired and retaliated against, I would just offer her the advice of, or any of us, like really just, because it just sounded like the whole time while she was talking, she was really up under some serious stress, and I think that gets overlooked a lot. We don't really understand the daily toll it is, and it's almost as if, like, I know she was listening to everybody's advice, but I just hope everybody understands that having to go through that type of, retaliation and racism and stuff, it does take a mental and physical toll on you. The one thing I did start doing that really, really helped me out was I just started recording. And I know, like in the beginning, because I wasn't sure about how I was going to record or anything, I'm not worried about whether it's state laws and stuff like that, because even if I have to go and transfer information back to where I write it on pen and paper, at least I actually have a recording. So that way, if it's certain things, or if you're able to get in position to record a particular act or a particular event, maybe that would be something that she would want to get into doing more. So that way she doesn't have to worry about, I got to take a note here, or this, that, and other. Now it's like certain times a day when I know something is about to happen, or I want to capture a certain procedure not being followed, I'll whip out my phone, because I'm allowed to have my phone being in management, and just put on my recorder. And, so that way, she's not having to constantly remind herself about taking notes. I mean, although still take your notes. I will also advise her, do not take notes in front of them. That was a mistake I did in the beginning. Either when you're on break or when you're at home, you should take any notes or documentation. Doing stuff like that in front of them tends to get them upset even more. And but I just wish her the best, and I hope. I don't know. I just heard her for the first time, so if anybody that's in that area of the world, Tennessee, that could give her any assistance or something, I mean, as far as, I don't know, because that sounded like a very serious situation. I know I had a very serious situation where, I had, my blood pressure had hit 216 over 130 at the time when I was going through my incident, and I had called Mr. Fuller while it was going on, and they had called EMS, and I had to be taken to the hospital. So I just hope that she's okay, and we just really take into consideration when you're going through stuff like this on the job that it really does take a toll. So, and not to get mad at the victims if they're not following through on certain things, because it's very draining having to constantly fight mentally and physically. And I'll mute my mic.
Thank you. Thank you a lot, Princess, for reminding us of that. She was a first-time caller, too. That was, I think all of us did not recognize her. It was our first time hearing from her because she had never called before. But the caller, black female in Tennessee, where she was saying that they had, like, slashed her tire and put a dent in her vehicle. Like, I think she mentioned several different attacks, violent attacks against her personal property. And I think poured like oil on her tools and just, constant harassment. She said it had driven her blood pressure up, and she was taking the stress out on others, like her family and such, at home. And she said this was in like a really small town in Tennessee, and they have their own private security at the plant, so they're not calling the police in this town when these situations, these acts of terrorism were happening. They were just delegating to the local plant security, company security. So, yeah, I agree. Very serious situation, should be taken seriously, and hopefully we can, check in. She'll let us know how things are going. And I'm hoping she got some time off. I think several folks encouraged her to see if she could get some time away for some self-care. I think that is always a tremendous advice, to just get some. Sometimes you just need a moment to kind of collect your thoughts. The system of white supremacy, when you are just being constantly terrorized, it's difficult to even think in a constructive manner about what's happening to you and to plan how you want to respond. So sometimes that time off is just to allow you to get a moment to compose your thoughts and figure out the best way to move forward. Do we have anyone that we missed completely? Anybody have a hand up that we have not heard from at all? Okay, I will assume that we got everybody. We have less than a half hour, so if anybody has commentary, something you think you want to share or ask about, please do not wait until the last minute. Go ahead and get a hand up. We had the question about the flag. I think the question about how do you identify the core group of most powerful whites for counter-violence purposes or what have you. How do you correctly identify them? I think might have even been another question that was posed, and I think even one other person said that they did have additional commentary. So if we got everybody, if folks have additional commentary, feel free.
Can I be heard?
Go ahead, retired firefighter. We'll just get everybody in the row.
Yes, sir. I have some additional information on the Don't Tread on Me flag if you and everybody wanted to hear some of it.
Proceed.
Yes, it's pretty old. I've heard about it before, but I never really didn't pay that much attention to it. But it's pretty old. It goes back to the 1700s when the two white factions and or gangsters were fighting against one another, and the snake is symbolic because in the 13 plantations, 13 colonies, the snake was prevalent. The rattlesnake was prevalent in those areas, so it was used as a symbol of something deadly. And the idea is to don't tread on me and or don't step on me or I will harm you. It's used today also primarily by the infamous Tea Party. So basically, the way I look at it, in short, it's code, it's symbolic, symbolism and code for racist white people just to flaunt around and show some symbolic form of racism that sometimes they actually do act out. Not sometimes, but most times act out in different ways, and the flag just symbolizes that. That's basically what it is. Thank you. What was the question? The other question?
I think how would we go about identifying the most powerful core whites who are responsible for doing the classifying and what have you? How would one go about identifying them? I think that was one of the questions posed.
Well, when a yellow caution light comes on in my head when I hear the word core whites, I really don't know what that means. You talking to a dumb victim of racism? I just identify that from the standpoint you're either white or you're not white. And if you're white, you are probably practicing racism, as far as I'm concerned. I try to keep it simple. But anyway, that's just my thoughts on that. Thank you.
No, I heard someone speak up simultaneously with retired firefighter. Maybe they got this. Yes, sir.
Awesome. This is Ken Steele yet again, and I just wanted to bring some attention to a lot of what I'm seeing lately is anti-blackness being portrayed or put out as, I guess, constructive entertainment for victims of racism, white supremacy. I just want to caution the listeners that, look, there seems to be a number of media outlets that are being exploited by other victims, and they're promoting a lot of these anti-black images in the media. I believe there was a video game that was released, a video game app that's determinably anti-black, and it's being, I guess, portrayed as constructive. A lot of the people that I see that are promoting this game are also utilizing lines from Neely Fuller's work to justify this content. And I just wanted to say that from what I can tell, it is 100% against everything that is discussed and suggested in the United Independent Compensatory Code.
What lines are they using specifically to justify? What lines are they saying, hey, this fits this part of Mr. Fuller's code?
I heard some people saying that that this work was it is constructive and it is producing justice because it is going against individual victims of racism that they classify to be a word that I believe is banned on this broadcast. So, they're also saying that the person who created this app is, quote unquote, boys with Neely Fuller. And I hear this line a lot used by this crowd. Neely Fuller is my boy, or he is the homie. And, it's, and then I hear the phrase code of conduct being associated with this. And I just believe that, there is just a serious misappropriation of the teachings of Neely Fuller going on. And some of these people that are using these teachings are engaging in what I've been able to determine is anti-black activity, and they're using their loose affiliation with Neely Fuller to go ahead and justify this. And again, they're using lines like produce justice and code of conduct in relation to this. And it just seems to be a trend I've noticed of black entertainers or black people putting out imagery under the guise of being constructive that is determinably anti-black. I mean, a week out and I'm seeing Jay-Z's J-Bone or J-Bo character who looks a lot like the racist depictions of black people from the 1930s, from between the 20s through 30s. Through 50s, and it's just, it's now being used as kind of like a symbol for him. And I'm seeing the image being propagated a lot more, and I'm seeing victims of racism being convinced that this is a good thing, that this is constructive, that this is powerful and informative, and it's very disturbing. And I fear that the same thing with these images and these phrases and these words is going to be done with what has been done with the N-word, where they've used us to kind of reintroduce that into our societal lexicon, and they're using us as an excuse to now have it in polite discussion, and it's very disturbing. Oh, and one more thing: the suspected white supremacist Bill Maher has gone after another group of victims of racism with his words, and again, black people and black entertainers were used to make this course of behavior for Bill Maher socially acceptable. So please be very, very wary of the ways that these racists are employing victims of racism to go ahead and push their agenda to make it so that they are more able to disrespect us with words in what is deemed polite conversation. And be mindful that I don't think that this is constructive, but they are painting it as such or framing it as such. And I will mute my line.
No, one of Mr. Fuller's favorite phrases, I think the phrase he probably says the most for a reason, follow the logic. And I think he says that one more than all the other phrases that he's known for saying, because that one is most important, being able to think and just make observations and come to logical conclusions. So when you see any sort of content, people might be saying, because racists do that a lot. Oh, yeah, this is constructive. This is going to end racism. All we need to do is legalize all drugs, and this will solve all of black people's problems forever. They do that sort of thing all the time, and you have to apply the same formula, use logic. And see, now, do I really think this is going to help black people? This is, really the type of thing that we need more of. This is going to help us solve our problems and take us where we need to go. Follow the logic. Other folks had commentary, questions, suggestions. They wanted to make sure we get in. We are, guess we have less than 50. I think that was Thomason. Yes, Thomason, New York. Go ahead.
Thank you, Gus. I just wanted to first give you your acknowledgement. I've been reading your Atlanta Black Stalwart, and it's absolutely great. And I just wanted to say you've been doing a great job writing. I just wanted to acknowledge you for that. And the piece you did on the Atlanta child murders and comparing it to the D.C. women being missing. I have, it brought me back to something else. I'll just send you an email. As far as I feel about the snake flag, the yellow flag, I've been seeing it since the Tea Party started. And I've concluded that presently we live under the most racist flag in the world, the American flag. So all other flags don't really matter as long as we still have to stand up and pledge to that. They force our kids to do it in school, etc. Then, what else? I mean, what does the American flag is everywhere. It's everywhere. And we were slaves under that flag. We was emancipated under that flag and still treated like second-class citizens to this day under that flag. So, what does the yellow flag really matter as long as we are forced to have allegiance to this American flag? The Ken Steele story, it made me so happy that when I was very young, around 8 or 9, I had terrible experience with white people at a camp, and therefore I never liked them, and I always felt like they didn't like me. So I never would have, never been in a situation like that. But to hear his story about hanging out with white people, and just terrible. I just wanted to make a comment on the shootings. Someone spoke about the shootings in Chicago. And, here in, I work at the hospital. We had 10 in 2 days that weekend. It's been quite a few shootings, but these young boys come to the hospital, they're shocked. They want to Instagram it. They want to act like they survived something. They want to threaten the people who shot them. And, you know, one thing I could say coming from the 90s, 9 times out of 10 when people got shot, they knew exactly who shot them. And when I see 100 people getting shot in Chicago and 14 murders, so that meant 80-plus people got shot, and none of them are saying white people shot me. You know, it just leads me to believe that this is something that's really going on in our community with each other, the self-hatred that we have for one another. I mean, I from what I see, these kids know exactly who shot them. I mean, they threatening them, you know, wait until I get out of here. Their cell phones is being used as evidence to arrest the people who did it. I mean, it's I just don't know if there's really black people. I think that we have to take ownership to this ourselves, you know, as black people, as black adults who live in these cities. I mean, we need to somehow organize or try to figure out a way, because these young kids think it's a game. It's not even, the consequences aren't even real to them until it happens, you know, and even when it happens, it's just something they want to post. I mean, it's not, I don't know. I just find it real hard to believe that 100-something people got shot, and none of them are saying that, yeah, the person that shot me was white, you know. And I mean my line.
Certainly valid. Anti-blackness is real. Certainly racists have done a phenomenal job. They have been phenomenally successful promoting the anti-blackness. Other folks, comments they wanted to make sure they get in last 10 minutes. I did want to say about that Venus Williams situation. I think someone had touched on that earlier, and we talked about it briefly last week. I think they released a report within the last 24 hours or so that she made a lawful she was lawfully entering the intersection where this accident allegedly happened, where these suspected racists are trying to sue her. I think where one of the old crotchety whites in the vehicle died in this accident, or sometime after the accident. They're trying to say it was somehow connected, and she killed him, and she was, you know, driving all reckless. But they said, yeah, she was driving lawfully. When I saw that, I said, well, wait a minute. How did the initial report even begin that she had done something wrong? Because it was, I think about this time last week, it was that she had done something wrong, that she had either was speeding through the intersection or made an illegal turn or didn't, you know, give the right of way, that she had done something wrong. She had done something unlawful with her motor vehicle that caused all this. And then to come out today and say, no, that is not true. There's still a pending investigation, and she made a lawful turn. That's the sort of thing that I say, no, that whites don't get benefit of the doubt ever. That is huge, particularly if you have a lawsuit where they talk about, I think the word they'll use is you are prejudicing people's opinions about this case and how they're going to think about it. That is huge. And I think this was in the middle of Wimbledon. Like, she's competing professionally to win a big tournament. That's millions of dollars. And what have you. She's won that tournament, I think, 4 or 5 times. And to be putting out misinformation in the paper, and that's the sort of thing that they have, that racists have a long history of doing to black people. Just thought that was important. And the Klan marching armed in Virginia, I think on this very day, I thought that was important as well. Other commentary folks had? I heard both of you. Just pick one. We'll give both of you. We'll make sure everybody gets, you know, a chance.
Right.
Okay, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm pretty sure I reiterate this. I'm from Chicago, and I've also said the statistics for unsolved murders in Chicago from last year was 75%. That is a troubling number. This is not statistics that I've made up. This is statistics from the Chicago Police Department. And even in the sense of when these young black men are being shot and they know who they are, the police also know who they are, but they don't do anything about it. I mean, they can arrest anybody who shoots another black man, but in a sense they don't want to, because they want to continue the cycle. So it's still dominated by a system of white supremacy because police will not do anything against those who shoot black men, whether they be black, whether they be white police officers. So nobody gets arrested for shooting black men. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, I was just going to say that's what I was reporting on with Venus Williams, because I saw the video also, and on top of it, the white people ran into her. According to the video, they actually ran into her, and I'm thinking, well, why this video didn't come out before she was accused of being at fault of the accident? But it still doesn't mean that she is not totally out of the lawsuit, because no charges ever was brought up against her. But she still is under that the lawsuit. But it does make it more difficult for these greedy white people to be able to get any money from her because of that visual tape. But you know how that goes as far as tapes. It doesn't make a difference if white people decide that they want to get some money out of that young lady.
The caller who was gracious yielded the floor a moment ago. Did you want to get your commentary in?
Yes. Thanks, Gus. It's the voice.
The voice.
Yeah, I just wanted to the segment about the adoption and it brought me into the mind because the young scholar from the Bay made a great point, and when you look at it, there was a report that just came out the other day. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, with the black child. I think it was a caseworker, and she was bringing a white child to her father on the airlines, and she got kicked off because they were questioning her about why are you with this white child, and she had to prove that I'm a caseworker. The reason I'm with this white child is because I'm bringing her to her father, and I find that very telltale because when people see white people with black children, it's like people are desensitized to the racial mixing that they just let them, just walk anywhere with them like, oh, okay, nah, they're probably supposed to be with that black child. But when it's the opposite, it's like we get stopped. Hey, what are you doing? Where are you going? What's the destination? And it wasn't like that back in the days. When we used to see whites with black children, we thought they were kidnapping, and we would bring it to their attention. But now they're so desensitized to the racial mixing that we just allow them to go, and then when they see us with their children, it's always at alert. So I just wanted to bring that up because I didn't know if anybody else heard about that, but I just wanted to add that in before we left the air. Thanks.
I had not heard about that incident, but it does remind me, we way back going down the archives from 2009, we had a black male on the program where his family, he had foster parents in his family, and I believe it's his mother-in-law. She adopted this white child, small white girl. She was like 6. And so this younger family, they would hang out with her all the time because they had children that were her age. So this is a black male in his 30s, young guy, and he would routinely be with this little 6-year-old white girl. And he said, oh, man, people would stop him, grill him. What are you doing? Where are you going? Urine sample, fingerprints. Oh, man. He said it was just a constant assault as though you are not supposed to be with this little white girl. Something, is amiss here, maybe even criminal. But I also wanted to add, the difference in terms of that response, why the incident that you're talking about and the guest that we had on the program, the reason that white people can respond like that is because they have power. They can get, enforcement officials and whomever, or just random whites on the block to come out and handle that situation quickly, violently, and have done so. Black people do not have that sort of power to do anything. White people can come in. I was just rereading Malcolm X's autobiography where he talked about how social services thoroughly destroyed his family. White people can come in and have done that, come in and, breaking apart whole families at will. They can not just walk off with one of your children, all of your children. And it's nothing that you or any of the black people in this whole state can do about it. It's a substantial difference in terms of power to respond when you see something like that you think is incorrect. White people have much more power right now to do something about that. Other folks have final comments?
Thank you. Thank you for that explanation. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Any final word?
One more thing I wanted to say. Something else that I see quite often at the workplace is black mental illness. And I'm talking about, people who are obviously mental ill, And one thing I've noticed in speaking to some people, especially when I'm working in the ER and they're being, admitted, and I'm able to maybe get into a conversation if they're, able to have a conversation. A lot of them have been to prison before. And after watching that Khalif Browder story, when I saw how insane the solitary confinement made people, I really wonder if there's a correlation between the high levels of black mental illness that I see, and I'm sure it's probably just as prevalent everywhere else, and their incarceration. I just wondered. And I'm in my line. Thank you, Gus.
Great.
Did anybody? Oh, sorry.
Did anybody?
I was just going to say, did anybody hear about the story about the Oklahoma suspected race soldier that shot to death his white daughter's quote-unquote black boyfriend?
Knew the cowbell incident had to go. Had to get that one in before we ended. I did hear about that. If it's the one that I'm thinking, I think he's getting a retrial. I think this is maybe the second or third time around where they just can't seem to convict this good old white Oklahoma guy for killing this black male. I did see about that earlier this week. I don't remember when the retrial is, but that'll be one I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to focus.
Well, it's not unusual, but I think I saw a picture of the boyfriend. The boyfriend looked like a white person to me. I don't know if anybody else saw a picture of this person. But I accept it if he's a quote unquote black person, non-white victim of racist white supremacy. I would wouldn't argue with it, but he sure looks like a white person, But then again, white people know they're the one who made it up. So, but I was just wondering about that.
I think someone posted the photograph on my Facebook page within the last day or so. If you look on my Facebook page for Gus T Renegade, if you scroll down a little bit, you should see a picture of the officer who's been charged and is going to have his retrial, and the victim as well. The victim, from my recollection, he definitely did not look like Robert Mugabe or Wesley Snipes. Right. I don't think he would pass as their doppelganger or twin at all. Not even close.
He don't even look like Mr. Obama.
Right. You have to look for yourself, though, and see. They might even have multiple photos because sometimes, it depends on the lighting and which photo you see and all that stuff. So, see if they got multiple photos so you can check them out and come to a conclusion that you think, again, following logic, seems like it's based on evidence and has some sense to it. We did our 3. Man, we will be back. I mentioned, right, that Crystal Tyler, she asked to come back and speak with us. So she originally picked Monday. We were going to do the program, and then she wrote back within like 24, 48 hours and said that she, if we did it on Monday, as she originally agreed to, that she would have to step away for 20 minutes and then rejoin us for the remainder of the program. So I said that, does not make sense. We should just pick a different day when you can be with us uninterrupted. So we're going to do Tuesday of this week. Crystal Tyler, the Wheat Money, will be back with us on Tuesday. I think she even said she's in Washington State now with Gus T and presumably her black crackhead husband and their daughter. But that should be Tuesday, July 11th, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. I might, if you want to, because I know we had people who wanted to read the Wheat Money, people who heard her broadcast in the archives where she said she'd be willing to give the book to black people for free if they wanted to read it. And I think there were some people who contacted me. They wanted a free copy of the book, and I had some struggles since she's coming back. If you want to read the book in advance, like for preparation, feel free. It is interesting. It does have constructive material in it. It has a lot of great Washington State information about racism, white supremacy. So if you're a black person, non-white person, you live in Washington State, might be a good one to have in your archives. I learned quite a bit about Washington State history of racism. But if you want her book, let me know. I can contact her, and she will probably give it to me for free, so I can pass it along if you want to read to prep. But Crystal Tyler, looking forward this Tuesday. If you have questions, gripes, guest suggestions, drop an email untiljustice@gmail.com. Again, thanks to everyone who tuned in. I hope it was a constructive investment of your Saturday evening. Remain safe. Glad everyone made it safely through July 4th. But, man, the system of white supremacy, it takes an immense toll on our health and well-being. Again, Nelson Ellis dies at 39. 39. Racism, white supremacy is very serious. And in that same way of thinking, sobriety would be best under conditions of white supremacy. The incident that happened in Greece, and there are too many of these instances, both from our personal experience. Man, racists, they do a lot of damage anyway. We do not need to help them by being intoxicated, where we can't really think, where we can't make the best decisions to keep ourselves safe, and certainly not to respond adequately. If we have to converse, have any sort of conversation with a white person, race soldier, badge or no, you do not want to be in the presence of white people who are under the influence. It is extreme. I say that consistently. In 5 minutes, it can go from totally calm to, I think my life is in danger. Take it seriously. That's it. Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cal signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother.
Problem. You're a victim.
I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning.
Shut up.
The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.